Welcome everyone to the 13th GSMA EMF Forum. I'm Dr. Jack Rowley, responsible for EMF at GSMA, and I recognize many of the people around this tables, but there are a few new faces and we welcome you all to the event. Also want to welcome our online participants, whether it's morning or evening for you, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for taking some time out of your day to participate in the event. Some housekeeping first off. You'll probably seen the bathrooms are just outside the doors to the right. We have tea and coffee across the hall for those who are here in person. Clearly, we have not solved a way to provide coffee for online participants. I'm going to start off with some very brief introductory remarks. One of the things that we've always tried to do with this is the EMF Forum is to establish it as a way to provide an update on what's happening, but also for an opportunity for people to ask questions directly of the experts and to clarify those issues. And this year, we're very fortunate to have some of the main agencies and authorities responsible for EMF participating in the event, including the World Health Organization, International Commission for Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, and experts from around the world. When we were establishing the EMF Forum for this year, we always try and think about what is our theme for the event. And this year, we was struck that we have had 5 years of 5G commercial deployments. And we thought that there was an opportunity to look at what was being claimed in 2019 and earlier about 5G and EMF versus what was the reality of what we've seen over the last few years. One of the things that any of us who have been involved in this EMF issue for some time will remember that we saw an awful lot of misinformation around what EMF would mean with 5G. That started to emerge in the US in 2016. We saw the 5G appeal to the European Commission in 2017, saying there should be no deployment of 5G until risk assessment had been undertaken. And we were seeing headlines, like you can see in the upper part of the slide, in 2019, asking whether or not it was too soon to be rolling out 5G, whether or not we knew enough about the technology and possible health risks. The situation has changed. You can see a recent headline about 5G from 2024. And what's changed in that time? Well, one of the things that's changed is COVID. And I would say that from my perspective, following the issue, the reaction of authorities to the misinformation linking 5G to COVID has actually helped to overall address the perceptions around 5G and more broadly the issue of EMF, particularly in traditional media. I would say that traditional media is much more skeptical about false claims about EMF these days. Social media continues to be a challenge in some markets and on some platforms. One of the things that I think we learned looking back is we can't allow an information vacuum. In 2019, I think there was only one authority statement that specifically said, we do not believe there is a health risk from 5G, and that was from the European Commission. Generally speaking, no other authority had thought it was necessary to have a specific statement to say there's no health risk from 5G. That started to change in the early part of 2020. The first social media claim linking 5G to COVID was in January of that year in Belgium, funnily enough, where we are now. It rapidly accelerated. Most of us will remember the attacks on telco infrastructure all across the world. As GSMA, we tracked over 300 attacks in 21 countries in the 12 months between March 2020 and March 2021. And many of those attacks were being described as being because of concerns about what 5G falsely was connected to COVID. In February of 2020, the first WHO statement about 5G and EMF appeared. And soon after that, we started to see many other authorities making statements, initially focusing very much specifically on that question of 5G and COVID, but then more broadly about 5G and EMF topics. And the clarity of those responses meant that it gave a lot of confidence, I think, in traditional media in terms of how they should report on the issue. It gave some clarity on social media and particularly the reaction of the platforms across many other aspects of misinformation about COVID help to deal with the issues. And as you can see on this slide, many authorities around the world have specifically now made statements about 5G and EMF, particularly as they start to think about deployments in their countries. The other thing that's happened over that time is we have a lot more information about EMF levels from 5G. And despite the claims before the networks were launched that first off, you couldn't measure 5G, that 5G would create huge increase in EMF levels, the reality of both of those questions is both of those claims was they were false. We now have a very large body of measurement results. We summarize them on the GSMA website. You QR codes on your badges link you to the event program, but also include to an infographic that summarizes some of these results. And we've just done an update of the website recently. So now have 61 surveys from 35 countries, covering all the bands, low band, mid band, and high band. And overall, those levels show, or those results show levels very low, that they don't change very much, and they're very similar to other mobile technologies. But we will have a panel today of experts who have done measurements across all those bands, the different types of 5G, who will be able to talk about their experiences of what real 5G has meant in terms of deployment and levels. And then recently, we've seen a number of reassuring scientific studies. So we've had Cosmos results earlier this year, and Professor Feychting will be able to talk about those results today. We've had more recently, one of the WHO supported systematic reviews of radiofrequency fields and cancer outcomes be published to overwhelmingly positive, I would say, media coverage around the world. And we will also have Professor Samaras, on behalf of the SEAWave project, talking about what's happening now in research in Europe and the next steps for that, because this continues to be an evolving issue where scientists will continue to identify questions and try and answer those questions for the benefit of the community. I already mentioned it, we've got this fact sheet or infographic type summary that you've got on your desks and also on the online that you can access. This is our attempt to try and summarize what we've learned over the 5 years. I would say at this point that I would say the key takeaway for me in thinking about today was that we need to answer the question that's being asked as we go forward. And the question that was being asked in 2019 was, is there a health risk from 5G? And because nobody was answering that question, the noise and the false claims spread. We hope we won't make that mistake going forward as we talk about new technologies in the future. So we need to make sure we don't allow that information vacuum to be created. With that, I will finish my remarks a few minutes early and introduce my colleague, Manfred Ruttner, who's one of the deputy chairs of the GSMA EMF and Health Working Group, to introduce our first science speakers. And I will be back various times during the day. Manfred, over to you.
A very warm welcome to the session Science Perspective from my side. In this session, we will hear 2 talks about the current topics in case of studies on RF EMF. I don't want to lose too much time, so I would like to welcome Professor Maria Feychting and Professor Theo Samaras for this session. And we will start with Professor Feychting. She is professor on epidemiology at Karolinska Institute of Environmental Medicine in Stockholm and head of the unit of epidemiology. She will talk about progress of the international cohort study of mobile phone use and health, the Cosmos study. Professor Feychting, the stage is yours.
So, thank you very much for inviting me to talk about Cosmos today. So I've been involved in research on electromagnetic fields and health since the late 1980s. So it's quite a long time now. But Cosmos has been ongoing for quite some time as well, not that long, but still. But now we have published results from Cosmos. So I'd like to start with some acknowledgement to be open and show you any links. So first of all, we always thank the Cosmos participants and the mobile phone operators that provided mobile phone operator data to Cosmos, which is a unique feature of this cohort study. And the project funding is, we have written about this in our papers, so all details can be found there, but there are certainly no influence from any sources outside the researchers on this study. So background and aim. So the aim of Cosmos, when it was planned, it was to address possible health risks associated with long-term use of mobile phones, specifically the radio frequency fields from the phones, and also other wireless technologies. And this came about because several organizations, for example, the WHO, had called for cohort studies with prospective collection of exposure information to address research gaps. And this call for cohort studies came because of the limitations there are in case control studies, because they are collecting information about the exposure retrospectively, which means after a person had been diagnosed with a brain tumor, for example, and from a random sample of controls. So there is a risk of recall bias that differs between the cases and controls, and also selection bias, because not everyone wants to participate in research. And if you do the study, if you identify participants after disease have occurred, you may have some dependence between the disease status and willingness to participate. So before going into Cosmos, I'd like to show you what cohort and case control studies really are, because we've seen from responses to our publication on brain tumors, but also in discussions, even with other scientists, that this is not entirely clear. So here I've tried to show you the principles of a prospective cohort study. So what you do is that you identify a study population at baseline, and at this point in time, everybody is free of the disease that you want to study. You assess the exposure at baseline. So you ask questions about current and historic mobile phone use. The historic exposures, of course, can have occurred long before you ask the persons to enroll in the study. For handheld mobile phones, at least in the Nordic countries, it's about 1987 that handheld phones became available. So then you establish and assess the exposures at baseline before any disease have occurred. The follow-up period is when you start following the cohort and register all occurrences of the disease that you want to study. And in my example, it's brain tumors. So you use cancer registers to identify cancers. You also follow the cohort in population registers to be able to identify those who died during the follow-up period, so that you can have a proper denominator in your calculations. And then you compare the disease incidence among those exposed to the unexposed. Okay, so here is a case control study. So what you can see, it's very similar. The main difference, I mean, you still have you still have the study population at baseline, which is when you start follow-up. And you have cases that occur during the follow-up period. You find them in the cancer registers. But the main difference here is that you ask questions about historic exposures after the fact that the persons have had this diagnosis. This is the way interphone was conducted. So as soon as cases had occurred, healthy controls without brain tumors were selected randomly from the study population. And the purpose of the controls is to give you information about the distribution of the exposure in the study population. So if you have a random sample, they will tell you this very accurately. And then, so the problem here is that since cases, they know they have the disease, and this may affect how they remember their exposures. An additional problem here, which I haven't indicated on this slide, is that not everyone wants to participate. So you will have some missing information. So perhaps half of all the controls that you have recruited agrees to participate. And some cases will also not be able to participate. And in the case of glioma, which is a malignant brain tumor with very poor prognosis, it can also be half of the cases that disappears. And the cases and controls are no longer a random sample of the cases and controls that you wish to ask questions to. In reality, many case control studies are conducted in this way instead. So again, study population, follow-up period, cases are identified in a proper way through cancer registers, but the researchers wait very long before contacting cases and controls. So they ask them sort of at the end of the follow-up period about their historic use. And here, many of the problems are even more, I mean, they affect the study even stronger, because then it's, the cases have had the possibility to more and more think about their disease and why they got this very devastating diagnosis, and many more have died. And the controls is as before, that they will, not all of them wants to participate. But here the cases will consist of persons who are healthier because they haven't died. And the time between when you ask about the exposure is even longer. So here you have even greater problem with recall bias and selection bias. So this was a background to explain the study designs. So what about Cosmos then? So Cosmos is conducted in 6 countries. They started enrollment at different time points. So Sweden and Denmark started first in 2007, 2008. And then a few years later, the UK, Finland, and eventually the Netherlands joined. And much later, France also started a Cosmos component. About every 4 years, we've had a follow-up questionnaire. Sweden and Finland did this in 2013-14, and then the Netherlands and the UK later. And these countries have also conducted a second follow-up questionnaire. In parallel, we also got data for a 3-month period from the mobile phone operators. So we had number of calls and duration of calls, so we could get the sort of objective information about mobile phone use. And this we have at baseline, but then also yearly over a period up until the first follow-up questionnaire. So the cohort now is a bit around 300,000 participants. And we continue to link the cohort to public health data registers, such as the cancer register, but also the hospital discharge registers, so that we can get information also about other diseases than cancer. And this we do when we plan to do a new study. Okay, so some design features of Cosmos that we did to try to optimize the study. We tried to optimize the recruitment strategies. So in those countries that created a completely new cohort, we oversampled persons who were really heavy users of mobile phones and those who were very light users, to have a large exposure contrast in the cohort. Some participating countries like the Netherlands and France, they optimized their cohort recruitment by piggybacking on ongoing large cohorts in their countries. So then they could approach cohorts that were already known to be willing to participate in studies like this, and they didn't have to collect all the information that the new cohort, Cosmos cohorts, had to do, like the more basic demographic information. And we used structured questionnaires to avoid the problem that we've seen in some of the case control studies, where participants have reported implausible hours of phone use. And most importantly, we have the operator records to validate the self-reported mobile phone use, and we could also use methods to adjust these self-reported values. The most important thing is that the questionnaires were answered before the health outcomes of interest occurred. So here are the basic data for Cosmos study on brain tumors. In this study, we could not include France because France had joined the cohort just very recently. But the other countries had almost 270,000 participants that could be included. And just a little bit less than 2 million person years had been accrued. And we identified 149 glioma cases, 89 meningioma cases, and 29 acoustic neuroma cases. And here, I don't know if you can see this, but it's the main results. We used the adjusted estimates of the hours of phone use, which we call regression calibrated estimates, but we also report the uncalibrated estimates to make it comparable to how previous case control studies had done it. And we used cut points at the median and the 75th percentile. But we also looked at whether the results were sensitive to the choice of cut points. So we also looked at the 90th percentile, for example. And we also made analysis where we treated the exposure as a continuous variable. And in none of these analyses were there indications of any increased risk related to amount of mobile phone use. So all the effect estimates are around 1.0, which indicates no difference in brain tumor incidence between those who use a mobile phone a lot compared to those who use a mobile phone just a little bit. So, and results from additional analysis where we looked at those who used the mobile phone even more, so the 90th percentile, and this we could do only for glioma because we had few cases of meningioma and acoustic neuroma. And the risk estimates were also around 1.0. So they all results show no indications of an increased risk. So some discussion points then. So the longest latency possible in Cosmos when we did this analysis was 30 years. So the persons who started immediately when handheld mobile phones became available could have been users for 30 years. Not everyone did that, of course, but we have quite a large proportion of long-term users. So about a third of the Cosmos cohort have used a mobile phone for more than 15 years. The results showed also no increase in tumor risk associated with time since first use. So those who had used a mobile phone more than 15 years did also not have any higher incidence than those who had not used a mobile phone that long. So the important thing here is that Cosmos could improve the exposure assessment considerably compared to previous cohort studies. So for example, the Danish cohort study and the UK Million Women study, they have reported results on mobile phone use and brain tumor risk, but they had none or very poor information about the amount of mobile phone use. So this Cosmos have used the same type of questions as the case control studies did. So we have quite detailed information about the amount of phone use in addition to the time since first use. We could also take hands-free use into consideration. And importantly, Cosmos, a prospective cohort study, is methodologically superior to case control studies because there is no differential recall bias in a cohort study. And because Cosmos collected the exposure information before anyone had any disease, so it's impossible that the disease could have affected how people answered the questionnaire about their mobile phone use. And there is no selection bias because we identified each and individual person in the cohort. Those who answered the questionnaire are included in the cohort, and everyone is followed in these nationwide cancer registers. So we have no loss to follow up. So there are some limitations still. So we would want to have a longer follow-up to increase statistical power to get more precise risk estimates, and especially for acoustic neuroma, where we had very few cases, but also meningioma could have been, we could have had better statistical power there. So we will continue to follow Cosmos to add additional cases and increase statistical power. And also importantly is that we still get comments that you haven't had a long enough latency. You need to have an even longer follow-up. And this we can, of course, do by linking the cohort to the cancer registers also in the future to be able to study potential effects of like 40 years of mobile phone use or 50 years of mobile phone use. It's highly unlikely that this would change the results. We haven't seen that yet for any cancer agent. So, for example, smoking, it's possible to see quite soon after smoking initiation and increased risk of lung cancer, even if, I mean, the variation of how long time it takes is large. And you see an effect of smoking many, many decades after having started, but it showed up quite, it should have shown up also for radio frequency field by now, but Cosmos has the possibility to address this in the future. Yeah, so just to summarize, Cosmos overcomes several of the limitations of past cohort studies and past case control studies. The earlier cohort studies did also not find any associations overall, but had limitations in the exposure assessment. And the results for Cosmos aligns very well with the previous cohort studies with regard to time since first mobile phone use. The interphone case control study found an association only among the heaviest users, and also a quite strange J-shaped exposure response pattern. And Cosmos and other studies have been able to show that this is likely due to bias, because of a difference in the recall between cases and controls when they have to think back how much they used the mobile phone previously. And there are several publications that address this. And the latest one is one from IARC by Baaken. I'm not sure how to pronounce that name, but and colleagues that find that the differences in the reporting between cases and controls is expected to cause this kind of J-shaped exposure response pattern. And as we all know, there are some case control studies that show positive results, increased risks, quite high risk increases sometimes, and also very soon after having started to use a mobile phone. And these results are incompatible with the age and sex-specific time trends in glioma in the countries where these studies have been conducted. So these studies are not informative and likely affected by recall bias and selection bias. Just a few words about the future. We in Cosmos, we currently have ongoing analysis of cardiovascular diseases and reproductive outcomes. We anticipate or are working on further updates of in health data registers to have a longer follow-up. And this will be for cancer, but also neurodegenerative diseases, for example. And we are planning, dependent on funding situation, additional repeat questionnaires where we will include more details about the exposure patterns and also update the information on the more soft outcomes like headaches and sleep and things like that. Other efforts that I would like to mention is that my recommendation is to continue to follow the brain cancer incidence trends in high quality cancer registers and also monitor RF exposure levels and sources in the population, as several ongoing EU studies are doing. And this would be more for information purposes and to ensure that exposure levels are not becoming very high. But from a health perspective, I mean, this is purely about assessing the exposure, nothing else. And I would not recommend any more case control studies. They do not seem to be informative in this research area. So thank you very much.
And now we will come to the second talk, and I will invite Professor Samaras to give his talk. Samaras is currently Professor of Applied Electromagnetic and Bioelectromagnetics at the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki and an affiliate professor at the University of Malta. He will talk about the progress of SEAWave within the CLUH research cluster. Professor, the stage is yours.
Good morning, everybody. I thank the GSMA for the invitation to participate in this forum. Just a disclaimer, I'm not here on industry funding because we have to mention these things. I'm here on public money. So it is money coming from the SEAWave project. The second thing I want to say is I thank Maria for her very nice presentation. If Maria is 1G in EMF research, then I am 2G in EMF research. Okay, so the title of my presentation is, indeed, the progress of SEAWave, but within the CLUH research cluster. The CLUH research cluster is a cluster that was formed by the European framework program, Horizon Europe, within the research in environment and health, and in particular in public health. It consists of 4 funded projects. These are SEAWave, Ethane, NextGem, and Goliath. Okay, and you can find on the side of this cluster how we have organized the cluster in working groups, and 2 of the working groups, Working Group 4 and Working Group 5, are responsible mainly for the actual research work. In fact, in the Working Group 4 about experimental studies, we found out which are the common, so to speak, health and biological endpoints that would be assessed by the different projects. And so people are trying to coordinate their work so we don't have duplication, or even if we don't have duplication, this would be in the form of replication. And then in work group 5, which is about exposure assessment, we also have their joint efforts, as I will show you. And we try to really monitor and assess the exposure in the European Union and also around the world. So about SEAWave specifically, SEAWave is a project which was supposed to last 3 years, but definitely will need the prolongation. We don't know for how long. The consortium comprises 15 partners. You can see them here on the map. But recently we have added 2 more associated partners, as we call them. That is the University of Novi Sad in Serbia, and also ETRI, the Electronics and Telecommunication Research Institute from South Korea, who will, the people from there, the colleagues from there will help us collect information, especially in South Korea, perhaps also on FR2 measurements. The structure of SEAWave is in 11 work packages. We have 4 work packages where we examine exposure. These are on the top left, work packages 1 to 4. I will mainly concentrate on work package 1 here today. And then we have 3 work packages, 6 to 8, which are about health risks, and they include in vitro, animal, and human studies. I must say that in work package 3, exposure monitoring from 5G massive MIMO base stations, perhaps I shouldn't say it in the form like that, we requested help from the industry, but the industry was not very happy to give us help. So that work package 3, is in huge delay. But definitely now we have found help from industrial partner, and we can perform our simulations and measurements and validate each other with the help of our industrial from colleagues from the industry. So what we have done in SEAWave in terms of monitoring the environment. We have collected publicly available data from different monitoring stations or monitoring networks around Europe. And you can see that the median values do not vary significantly across Europe. So we have Greece, Romania, Serbia, France and Belgium, Catalonia in Spain. And you can see that the median value of the RMS that is of the electric field RMS that is measured in the environment remains more or less around 1 volt per meter in these monitoring networks. In this study, we also saw what happens with the temporal evolution of the measured electric fields in the environment, you can see we don't have changes in most of the networks. We do have some changes in Catalonia. You can see graph B, top right, because there we know where it comes from. It comes from the fact that they were installing more and more sensors, these monitoring stations in the environment, close to base stations. So that's where it comes from. It's not that the environment has changed. It's the placing of the sensor that has changed. And also this is another thing that we saw in this publication, that the placement of the sensor, even the height, is very important on what we register from the environmental electric fields. For example, in France, and Uruk Zavad is here, who was the main author of this study in SEAWave. In France, they place the sensors not on top of buildings like in most other countries, but they have it in posts, etc., which is at a medium height. And there they measure. And what the group from France did was that they, for the first time, they implemented the primary component analysis in the data that were collected by these sensors. And what they found out is that there are two characteristics, two components, so to speak, you can see the vectors there, two components that come out of this analysis. The first component says that we have seasonality. So the month is important, especially in places where we have holiday makers and where we have business. Okay, so this is the first outcome. And the other outcome, of course, was the number of antennas around the sensor did play a role. So the density of the base stations. And this came out with this primary component analysis, a very clever way to treat the data. In the area of monitoring, Wout is here, who is the lead of the Wout Joseph from IMEC, who is a lead in Goliath. I forgot to say that for exposure, the lead person in SEAWave is Joe VR. But Joe VR and his group, they participate also in Goliath, where the exposure is led by Wout Joseph from IMEC. You can see here a joint, again, in the area of monitoring environmental fields. You can see here the effort they did on trying to evaluate, so to speak, low cost, I would say, low cost sensors that can be deployed in large numbers in the environment so that we have a real check or a little control over the environmental fields all the time, especially their evolution in time. And NextGem, which is another project, did this very nice review where everything about monitoring and exposure assessment and the techniques that we use are explained. This is a recent review published in Environment Research. Now we leave monitoring of the fields in the environment and we go to exposure assessment. Exposure, as you know, has many different components, 3, in fact, perhaps not too many. The 3 components is the exposure that comes from the radiation emitted by the infrastructure. By infrastructure, we mean access points, base stations, etc., radio, broadcasters. And then we have the radiation that is emitted by devices that are portable. So this is uplink for mobile, for cellular systems, but also other devices that are in our environment. And this is bystander. So we have 3 components that they all contribute to the exposure of a citizen, of a person sitting in a room, sitting in a bus, etc. So in our project in SEAWave, we're trying to evaluate and try to assess all of these components. In an effort like that, in an effort in that direction, we had these personal exposure meters that were carried around by operators in transportation media in Paris, in the metropolitan Paris. And you can see here, why is that? Because many of the citizens, many of the people in big cities, they spend a lot of time inside transportation. So we would like to see what is their exposure during commuting or during using the transportation in these cities. And you can see that in the area of Paris, we measured all the downlink exposure. So this single component we had from there. And you could see that it is mainly that the downlink exposure comes from the 700 to 800 LTE bands. So it's 4G mainly. And you have in train stations, which is the second to the right group of bars, you can have this pink line, which is actually the good old GSM 900, okay, in train stations. And then Goliath did a similar thing, but they did it in different environments. So their operators of the Expo-M, which is another personal exposure meter, was going in different environments, and by different environments, they mean urban, suburban, and metropolitan environment. And you can see that when you take the data from these measurements and you classify them with artificial intelligence, okay, with a K-means classifier. Well, it's not actually artificial. It is a way of classifying data. You can find out that there are differences between the environments. So in an urban environment, which are the red dots in the map, you can see that the average total electric field is much higher than what you see in the rural environment, which is the green cluster of dots at the left bottom part of the map. Now, how about then uplink? What comes from the use of our own portable devices, not of the devices of people sitting next to us in a bus or in the train or in an event. So the uplink was also studied by Jiang Lu, who is a PhD student of GeoVR in the metropolitan area of Paris. And you can see here, or perhaps you don't see it, it is a very intricate protocol, but it takes into account everything. It takes into account voice over LTE. It takes into account voice over IP with WhatsApp. It takes into account FTP uploading, downloading. It takes into account streaming, video streaming, etc. So the protocol is very well thought of, and you can see here they have about 380 measurements, which are quite a number of measurements, and they can give us a good statistical sample. And you can see here that, for example, I will go to the graph on the right, where we have, of course, dual connectivity, 5G exposure, which is the most right box plot and the cloud plot. You can see that the transmitted power there is the lowest, okay, from 5G. And this is also important for the results, but I will not go very much into the results of this study. But I would say that the bullet point number 4, or conclusion number 4, that the transmission power in 5G bands is generally lower than in other bands, while throughput is higher. This is a very important outcome. And also, in terms of environment and the footprint of its technology, Joe and his team, they have measured also the radiated energy transmitted per bit of information. And they found out that for 5G compared to 4G, that was about half. So this saves a lot of energy as well. Okay, so this is another benefit of introducing 5G technology in our networks. Then we have used artificial intelligence. Okay, so what they do is what we do also in Greece, because we will have not published our results. These are results from France, but we did this measurement campaign also in other countries, as I will show you later. But what we do is we travel around the city on the streets with a spectrum analyzer, in fact, measuring all the different bands. And then we have, of course, a filter that smooths out all the different peaks, okay? And this is the averaging method that we propose. And this data, from this data, we can take different features that are many. For example, the place of measurement, the position of measurement, etc. But what we do is we select only 8 features. And these features are the density of the surrounding buildings, the height of the closest building, etc. And all these features, for those who are engineers and physicists, are easy to understand. All these features have to do with propagation of electromagnetic fields in an urban environment. So these are the main inputs, or the features that determine what you would measure at the position in an urban environment. Okay, and then we have these features. We feed them to neural network with these characteristics here, number of neurons, etc. We feed them to a neural network to train it, and then we take this as a training area. That would be the test area, and you can see that the root mean square error is 0.33 volts per meter, a very good score. So we can use artificial intelligence to try and evaluate from a model we have for a specific city. I have to say that these models are specific to the environment they were created for. I cannot take this model now and bring it, I don't know, to Zaventem, to the airport suburb in Brussels, okay? But they are specific to the city they are made for, and this can help us actually predict the values of the electromagnetic field in areas we don't have measurements yet. Okay, we try to understand what we expect in these areas. From ethane, again, coming back to the CLUH cluster, excuse me, from ethane, which is led by Anke Hoes, Professor Anke Hoes at Utrecht, they have created, based on the Van Vel, systematic review on exposure assessment in Europe, they have created a dose calculator, which is available online on their site. And this dose calculator I have applied for my use because it asks you actually many different, I would say here, features that are characteristic for the use you do of your mobile phone, of your laptop, of your tablet, where you live, if you live in an urban environment, suburban, how close to a base station, etc. And then you can derive the dose on your brain that is coming from your portable devices, that is from your mobile phone, and from environmental fields, which are all the sources that are in the environment, base stations, so access points, and so on. Treat it with care. This dose calculator, you have to treat it with care because it doesn't have uncertainty on it. So it gives you a value, but the paper itself has a large uncertainty. That's my word of caution. And also, calculating the dose, we have said that in our first policy brief that we have issued from CLUH, calculating the dose and trying, as Maria said, to keep up with how exposure changes in Europe by calculating the dose from different sources does not imply that we accept additive effects of electromagnetic fields. Okay? So it's just another way of characterizing exposure and its evolution in time. So in exposure assessment, we have Goliath and SEAWave driving actually exposure assessment in CLUH. At the moment, in SEAWave, we have a large number of literally thousands of measurements, not only from France, but also from other countries. The problem is that all these data sets, although they were created with the same protocols, because the protocols had been decided at the beginning of SEAWave, then we implemented them. Now we have all these data sets, but the format they are in is different. So the homogenization of all this data is a big effort, and this is where we are at the moment. We're trying to homogenize the data in a way that we can process them in the same way and get the same results that concern different countries. At the same time, we're performing calculations on how to treat exposure, so outside the body, the measurements that we have, how to translate it to exposure inside different organs, because SEAWave in the end will give an exposure index, a global exposure index. So the exposure in specific absorption perhaps, or in SCHEER of different organs inside the body coming from all three components of radiation, so downlink, uplink, and bystanders. Okay? Whereas ethane, they have taken the approach of dose per day, so joules per kilogram per day in the brain or in the whole body. Now, I will just, if I have some more time, I will just like to tell you a few things about our health risk studies, because I suppose these are of more interest to you. In Work Package 6, we have animal studies in SEAWave. You can see here that we have 3 different animal studies. The first study has finished. The results are there. We have the results. They are ready to be published. I'm afraid I cannot tell you anything about that. but we have seen some, I can keep you a little bit perhaps thrilled, we have seen some unexpected results. Okay, so there we have the results about the immune response, what's happening in skin. We have upregulation or downregulation of different genes that that deal with immune response, etc. So this will be soon published. After we carefully check again our dosimetry because of this unexpected result. So we have to redo our dosimetry, and then our colleagues from ENEA, the group of Maria Teresa Mancuso, the colleagues from ENEA in Rome, will be able to publish these results. Okay. We also have finished the exposure of CAR-S mice. CAR-S mice are the ones that are a good model for squamous cell carcinoma. The exposure here again is at 27 gigahertz. I have to say that SEAWave is focused for health risk studies is focused on FR2 only. All you see here is exposure at 27 gigahertz. Okay, we're not doing exposure at 3.5, 3.6 like the other projects do in CLUH. So the exposure of mice, of CAR-S mice for squamous cell carcinoma, actually promotion, because it is used by DBMA, but we are looking at promotion, has also finished. We also have some results there, which I cannot tell you, but histopathology is continuing. And now we are in the third animal study, which is about the patch1 knocked out mice and wild type mice, which are radiated at the moment at INEA, where we don't have any results yet, but we take data from weight, etc. So the first study that has finished, you can see the protocol at the bottom of the slide, was a study that exposed pups of mice, of patch1 mice, to 27 gigahertz. We had 3 different exposure groups, as you can see there. We had some exposure. We have absorbed power density at 6.6, so 1/3 of 20, and absorbed power density at 20. Okay, so we had these different exposure levels, and this is the data that needs to be published now after we finish the dosimetry with that. And then the other one, we had again 3 groups of exposure, but this was an exposure of 100 days, and as I said, it was DBMA initiated tumor, squamous cell carcinoma, and we're trying to find out if there are differences between female or male. These are a control group or highly exposed group, etc. Okay, I have to say that eventually from the biopsies that the colleagues in INEA, from the pathologists in INEA that will take, will also examine not only the carcinogenicity, the potential carcinogenicity of FR2 of 27 gigahertz, but we also examine things like male fertility, lens opacity, which is very important at these frequencies, and also hippocampal neurogenesis and neuroinflammation because of the neurodevelopment of the animals. Okay, so these will also be endpoints that will be treated and will be published at the end of the studies. The human study, work package 7, will treat actually volunteers from a healthy group. You can see it on the top left, 6 male, 6 female. Then we'll have thinonate skin, again 6 male, 6 female, with the dermatoporotic skin that is sun exposed and perhaps prone to cancer development. Then we'll have cancer prone skin because of different syndromes in the skin, so genetic syndromes, that is the girl syndrome, girl syndrome on the top, on the bottom left. And there is another group that was added actually by the Sweet Dermatological Association because they liked so much our work. And they said, we pay our colleagues at SCHEER, at the University Hospital in Lausanne, to include another group of people, so 6 male, 6 female, with atopic dermatitis, which is a very common lesion that appears in different age groups. So what they do is we have a fully double-blinded study. We have 2 devices on the arms of the volunteers. We don't know which one of the 2 devices is irradiating. Nobody knows until we unblind the whole study. And they irradiate for half an hour. We couldn't do more because patients are lying there almost without moving for half an hour. We can't take more than that. At 20 watts per square meter, again, absorbed power density. And what we do in the end is we take a biopsy, or not we, our dermatology colleagues. Okay, they take a biopsy at 1 hour after irradiation and 24 hours after irradiation. And they do what is, I think, the state of the art in omics. It's single-cell RNA sequencing, which means that for all the cells they find in their biopsies, they're trying to do a UMAP. A UMAP is actually a projection of several parameters in a single map, in a single 2D plot. And you can see here all the different cell types that exist in human skin, okay, in the biopsy, and you can see how the map looks for a healthy skin volunteer. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to find, first of all, that all the cells are there, and we don't have any movement of cells in precancerous stages or giving signal that we have inflammation and so on, okay? So that's what they do, and they need, you can see here, that they need a lot of data, so they feed in the biopsies all the time so that we have in the end the data about the distribution of the cells in these UMAPs. So on health risk studies, I can say that the results from the animal study on 21 days of postnatal exposure are ready to be published. We have to do the dosimetry. The human study progressed at a good pace. At the moment, they found that, of course, the more biopsies we have, the stronger the signals we'll get from this study. The comparison between health condition groups cannot be performed at this point because they have mainly from healthy volunteers, they have the biopsies. I haven't mentioned the in vitro studies, but in vitro studies are also ongoing with keratinocytes, melanocytes, melanoma cells, etc. And for keratinocytes, we have concluded the study on oxidative comet assay at 4 hours of exposure. This had not been included in the initial grant agreement of the project, but our external advisory board, and I can here say who is our external advisory board in SEAWave. It is Dr. Ron Melnick, former NIH. It is Professor Clemens Dazenbrock, also retired, and it was the late Ziskin, Professor Ziskin, who actually we lost in the first year of SEAWave, so we didn't replace him with another member. But what we do in the plenary meetings is we have a real critical review of our presentation, the results, and then the reviewers tell us, you need to do that, you need to do that, you need to do that, or this, or we don't agree, we disagree, etc., and we move like that. And one of the tests suggested was the oxidative comet assay test that had not been arranged for, or had not been initially chosen. But then we did that, and they have finished with 4 hours exposure. The keratinocytes will be also exposed to 24 hours exposure, again at 27 gigahertz. We did have some problems there with the exposure setup because we had temperature increases, etc. And this is the reason that we need to have an extension of the project. That's why I'm saying that now currently the project will most probably, I hope the European Commission will accept it, will be extended just to conclude the health risk studies, because for exposure we have already a lot of data. We need the results from the health risk studies because SEAWave foresees an IARC-like assessment of our results for skin cancer. So we will go for 1 week to Lyon, and we will meet there with representatives from each partner. And then we will form groups with our collaborators who will be online. And eventually, IARC will compile a kind of, so to speak, monograph about the results of the project. Okay, so thank you very much for your attention. Any questions will come later. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for this interesting talk. We are good in time, and I will invite Professor Feychting and Professor Samaras to go on the stage, and please take a seat. In addition to Professor Feychting and Professor Samaras, I will also welcome Dr. Dan Baaken from the German Federal Office of Radiation Protection and ICNIRP Scientific Secretary for the period 2024 to 2028. So also welcome to Professor Hirata from the Nagoya Institute of Technology in Japan and chair of the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection for the period from 2024 to 2028. To start the discussion, I would like to ask Professor Hirata, can you tell us a little bit what are the ICNIRP's plans for your period up to 2028? And can you tell us a little bit about what do you think about the biggest knowledge gaps and need for research?
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, well.
Yeah, for the work plan of ICNIRP, it will be mentioned later by Dr. Dan Baaken. So I'd like to say about the knowledge gap for radiofrequency radiation. Actually, the knowledge gap document will be published soon. And now to be published in Health Physics. In the document, we primarily identified the gaps that directly contribute to the development of a future guideline. These include areas such as pain threshold, core temperature rise and associated health effect, ocular injury and function, and pain from contact current. For biological outcomes where effects have not been substantiated, we found insufficient plausible evidence to suggest RF cause harm below currently established threshold. However, this doesn't imply no open scientific question remain. In these circumstances, the document also addresses topical issues where specific data gaps have not been identified, such as oxidative stress, cancer, and neurodegenerative disorders. We also highlight uncertainty in dosimetry, particularly in relation to setting exposure limit. In the 2020 version of the guideline, we introduced reference level for local exposure, which were not included in previous version. Further research is also necessary to address this and other related engineering aspects. So can I take over Dan for our 2024-2028 work plan?
Okay, yeah.
Think so, yes.
Also, thank you for the invitation to the meeting. For the work plan, so there's a number of things coming for 2024-2028. I will try to focus on the things most relevant for here. So first of all, we are planning to install a steering group in ICNIRP on communication to improve our communication on our guidelines, because it was the case in the past that there was questions from general populations, but also from regulators internationally on certain aspects of our guidelines. So we are looking to target this with a kind of a Q&A format on our website, and also be more clear and more understandable with what we want to say with our guidelines. So this is an important aspect. Then we are going to look into a comparison of radiation protection systems. So there is the ICNIRP, the International Commission on Radiation Protection, who's looking at ionizing radiation, so the other spectrum. And they have a long history in radiation protection. They do a lot of good things in terms of recruiting young scientists for their work and all these stuff. And we are just comparing what they do with their systems and how this compares to the system of non-ionizing radiation protection. And our first goal is not just say what's better and what is worse. It's just like exploring the field. So where are similarities and where are differences in terms of the radiation protection systems? So these are two important things for the coming term.
Thank you very much. I think I forgot also the online participations can post a question in the Q&A tab, and we will put this question on. So to the audience, who has a question?
Karolinska from UK Health Security Agency. Thank you very much for the talks. It's really interesting to see where the research is and how you're filling the gaps. I have just one question about the monitoring of exposures, and it's interesting to see that you see this consistency about like 1 volt per meter. I had a couple of questions regarding that. So one thing is the equipment you use, the noise level, is it well below that? Because when I looked at this, I saw that in some cases the noise level can be quite high if you go for the cheap version, and you have to pay a little bit extra if you want to get lower in the noise floor, which again, it's interesting to see if there's a low cost that's been a low cost option that's been developed, whether that will be commercialized. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question. It is true that different systems have different sensitivities, okay? But when you deploy such a measurement network of sensors, definitely you choose to place them where your electric field, what you're measuring, is above the sensitivity of the sensor. If you have a sensor there that cannot measure because the sensitivity is low, then you take it from this area and you take it somewhere else where the E field is higher. So that's about sensitivity. Now, the noise you're mentioning, we don't see. We don't see any noise because we have this 6-minute average. Everybody is measuring and is registering 6-minute averages. So this averaging takes away the noise, and it gives us only the actual broadband electromagnetic field we have at that position. Okay, so it is nice to have this software-defined radio, actually, which are very small and very low-cost devices. The problem of these devices is, first of all, usually they measure only one component, not 3 components. And then the sensitivity. But if you want to see what's happening in time, of course, even measuring one component is good enough. It always depends on what your purpose is for the monitoring. I mean, there are many different systems fit for purpose for different monitoring networks.
Okay, thank you. Next one.
Good morning. Well, first of all, thank you to all the presenters. Mike Wood from Telstra and chair of the GSMA EMF group. My question was also a follow-up to you, Theo. I just wanted some clarity. You talked about the SEAWave millimeter wave assessment, and I think I saw some timing earlier of 2025. Are you looking to do an IARC risk classification for millimeter wave to provide some guidance going forward? Could you just clarify what, maybe it was on the slide, but I missed it, but what is the end outcome, and when are you looking to actually do that? Because some countries have rolled out millimeter wave, and it will be a feature of many new networks going forward over time. But could you just clarify what the actual plan is? Thank you.
Yes. Indeed, some countries have deployed 5 millimeter waves and FR2 5G systems. But as you know, there are other countries in Europe which have not even auctioned this frequency spectrum. And I can tell from the politicians, at least in some countries, that they have not auctioned that because they want to make sure, first of all, what would be the risk assessment in this frequency area. So what SEAWave came forward to do was actually, that's what we proposed to the European Commission, and that's why I suppose the project was awarded funding, was that we would focus on FR2, trying to answer things like cancer on the skin, because the skin and the eye are the main target organs for millimeter waves because of the very superficial penetration, shallow penetration. So what we will do in the end is we will collect all the data we have from these lines of evidence, as we call them in SCHEER. So we'll have animal studies, in vitro studies, and human, because we have even a clinical study, as you saw. We'll have human studies. We won't have epidemiological studies because technology is not there. So we can have epidemiological studies, but we will have all the different lines of evidence, and we'll try to evaluate them the way IARC does. So we will include partners who conducted the studies, and we'll have exposure people. We'll have also, of course, we will be a very small group compared to the groups that IARC gathers together for their monograph evaluation. But we're trying to pull together all the resources of the project, also our collaborators online, trying to do this kind of evaluation, coming up with a paper. It will not be a monograph. It will not be published, most probably even in Lancet, like these evaluations are published, but it will be a paper that will evaluate the risk for cancer, for skin cancer, due to 27 gigahertz of FR2 radiation. That's the main goal of this exercise. And for this, of course, we need the results from the biology, for all the health risk studies. That's why we want a prolongation of the project, to have all this evidence, even unpublished data, because it will be shared in confidence among the partners of the project, among the consortium. We share them anyway. Even unpublished data, we will try to evaluate and come to this end, which would be a risk assessment paper about the skin cancer. Okay, it's not only melanoma, it's also, as you saw, squamous cell carcinoma. It's also because skin is officially is the largest provider of cancers. So 80% of all cancers, 80% of all cancers worldwide are skin cancers. It's just that people, they go unnoticed because they are mainly benign. They are not malignant like melanoma. They are benign, and they are not treated in cancer centers, in oncological clinics. They are treated in dermatological clinics. So we thought, let's look at that, since we have millimeter waves and superficial absorption.
Thank you. There's a question in the fourth row.
Thank you. Very interesting presentations. My name is George Stephanopoulos from the Greek Mobile Association of Operators. My question is to Maria. Could you please provide us some further information on the 4-year assessments, reports produced? On the slide you you exhibited the 2016 summary. I may have missed something, but could you summarize what is coming and what is the next summary? And my second question to the panelists is, could you please kindly comment on the gap analysis presented by the ICNIRP chair? What is going to be addressed by the current European projects versus the gap analysis identified? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. So what we have ongoing, where we are conducting analysis at the moment within Cosmos, are studies on cardiovascular and cerebrovascular outcomes, like myocardial infarction and stroke and things like that, and also reproductive outcomes. So that hopefully will finalize this analysis during the fall. And then it's difficult to predict how long time it takes to publish, but these are in the pipeline. We are planning to update our linkages with health data registers, such as the Cancer Register and the hospital discharge register and perhaps prescribed drugs register to be able to identify cases of neurodegenerative diseases like ALS, Parkinson, Alzheimer's, and see whether we get enough numbers to conduct analyses on these outcomes. So here we are currently contacting the national authorities that are responsible for these registers to update the linkages. We are also planning to send out follow-up questionnaires. This depends on funding available, where we will have a new type of exposure assessment to also capture the new habits of using mobile phones and also other wireless communication devices. And also the more soft outcomes, which we have to assess through questionnaires. So we will repeat the questions we've had in the baseline questionnaire, in the already conducted follow-up questionnaires about headaches, sleep problems, and other symptoms that you cannot capture in registers. So that's what's planned for the future.
Okay, and the second question, I think, is going to ICNIRP.
Yeah, actually, the ICNIRP is not in a position to comment each project, but we have actually have a great interest on such project, actually. For example, I am one of the advisor of Goliath project, but such big project is not actually associated with ICNIRP activity. We are evaluator of the paper or research output. Then, if relevant, we will consider such outcome in the next revision of ICNIRP guideline or statement.
Okay, I'd like to add something.
Yeah.
We are, of course, carefully monitoring what's going on in the EU projects, and there is a number of people that are also involved in a few of these projects. So I'm part of the Next Gen project. We are doing an umbrella review on cancer and radiofrequency magnetic fields. And there is also commissioners like Jens Kuhne, a colleague of mine from BFS. He's part of the SEAWave project, working together with Theo. So we are quite aware what's going on in the EU projects. And of course, in future papers or guidelines, we will take into account the new results.
Okay.
Just one
please.
comment, because I think that George's question was mainly about what is the correspondence between the significant gaps that ICNIRP has identified and the significant the knowledge gaps that we were trying to close inside the European projects. One, it's not a gap, but it is an issue. And now I'm talking not as a dosimetrist or as a SEAWave project coordinator, but as a risk assessor for the European Commission, as a member of the SCHEER. One of the issues we have to settle with is what's happening with this oxidative stress. This is something, and this is very well identified by ICNIRP. We have once and for all tried to see what's happening at the biology, because that is at the mechanism level. Okay, so we have to settle with that. This is true.
Okay.
Although we have the recent, so Emilie is here. We have the recent systematic review about oxidative stress that shows that there are no effects, etc., or oxidative stress does not actually cannot be considered with as a mechanism. People are coming back to it again and again. So I think we have to settle with that. Okay. This is one of the issues I see very, very hot and very dominating at the moment in the discussions we're having.
Thank you. I think we have an online question. Check, please.
Yeah, thanks, Manfred. While you have your SCHEER hat on, Theo, we had a question. What's anticipated at the EU level with respect to the public and worker limits and harmonization with ICNIRP 2020? That's the first question. I have a follow-up question with your SEAWave hat.
About the directive on workers, I cannot tell you much because SCHEER is under DG Santé, which is public health. So the directive comes actually from another service of the Commission, which is the Director General for Employment. So I don't know what is going on in that directorate. Literally, I don't know, because we haven't been conducted. We were just mandated by them together with the Director General of Sante, of Public Health. But for the public health, I can tell you that the SCHEER working group has handed already a long time ago the final revisions to the technical annexes of the Council recommendation, taking as a base the ICNIRP 2020 guidelines. Okay, this I can say. At the moment, the problem is that we are at the education phase, so to speak. So this can go out of the records, of course. We're at the education phase where I'm trying to convey all these changes and then the knowledge to people who have studied law, philosophy, literature, and so on, because these are the policy officers, and then they will have to take it to the policy decision level, which is the commission, etc., later. But things are going on very fast. That's what I can say. And I think that next year we will have most probably will have a new council recommendation next year. But this is for the public, not for the workers. Okay? Yeah.
Sounds like we'll be inviting you back again next year, Theo.
Okay. Glad to be here.
If you could put your SEAWave hat on. Now,
Yes.
a follow-up question from online. So this is regarding the skin surface millimeter wave studies. So it's a question, please confirm that there is a careful measurement of the surface temperature rise in the RF exposed versus non-RF exposed to distinguish the possibility of whether it's a thermal effect or some non-thermal RF effect.
Yes, exactly. This touches exactly to what I said, that we are now, because we did have some effects, what remains is to validate our calculations with measurements that we are going to do on-site at ENEA, at the cages where the experimentation is taking place. This has been already treated for in vitro, because for in vitro we do measure the temperature, we have infrared cameras, we have everything under control there. But with animals, it's a different thing. And with animals, we have still to verify / validate our dosimetry because of such reasons of keeping everything under control with temperature. Yeah.
Thank you. I think there's a question in the first row.
Thank you very much. Patricia Martin, EMF officer in Orange. So concerning the European recommendation, thank you. I had the same question, so it's clear now. We'll wait next year. And to Maria, thank you very much for the impressive work on Cosmos. It's really crucial. And so you mentioned France that came in so recently. When do you think you'll be able to include that? Probably in 2030, or
Can I
what's
put
the plan?
Maria?
No, I think that France can be included in the next follow-up of cancer, for example. So in a couple of years or so, it's France can be included.
Not so far. And my last question to you. So we could see some critic comments on the websites, and you were very reactive in deeply answering them. Do you think it's okay now from their side, or are there always some open questions?
So I think those who sent in letters to the editor, that group of people, will never be satisfied unless we show some increased risks. It's quite interesting that they criticize aspects of the study that also applies to the case control studies. But they don't seem to realize that they sort of criticize also their own work, some of them, and also the work that they believe is showing things. So I think these kind of people will never be satisfied unless it's shown that there is an increased risk.
A follow-up question to Maria on that, exactly on that, because I was reading your study, the letter to the editor and your answer, etc. When you saw, they also criticize you about the quality of the cancer registries. There was a question.
That they themselves.
Okay, which they themselves they used.
Yes.
But doesn't it really appear a little bit strange that you have in the total cases in this cohort, at least to me, it appears a little strange that you have more meningiomas than you have acoustic neurinomas.
No, meningiomas are more common than acoustic neuromas.
They are already.
Yeah, acoustic neuromas are really very rare tumor type. Meningiomas are more common. They are more common, especially among women, but they are the next most common brain tumor type. So gliomas are more common, but I mean, in women, for example, meningiomas are more common than gliomas. So, but acoustic neuromas are really very rare.
The numbers that you've had in your cohort, they are not far off from what you had expected from incidence numbers for these cancers in the population, right?
No, right. It's
because they criticized a lot that the registries they did not register very well all the cancer case, etc. So
no, but they criticize. They criticize that we have too many cases. They in one section, in another section, they say we have too few.
Too few, yeah.
So it's sort of it seems, I don't know. It's their comments are really very strange. The issue is that we use the cancer registers, the national cancer registers, which in all included countries are of very high quality. And we do internal comparisons within Cosmos. So to introduce a bias, the cancer register would have to selectively register cases that in Cosmos have not used mobile phones a lot, which is unreasonable to think. But when we do estimates, we are quite spot on what we would expect.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Are there further questions in the second row?
Hi, Murray, Romney Telecom. Just a question on the acoustic neuroma. Was there any evidence of ipsilateral correlation with exposure? There's very few cases, but that would be a very interesting phenomenon if there was any correlation with which side was exposed.
So we didn't conduct such analysis because we had so few acoustic neuromas, so random variation would be very problematic if doing even subgroup analysis. So this is for future analysis when we have accrued more cases, we can do this kind of analysis.
Okay, thank you. In the meanwhile, a question from me, I think to Dr. Baaken. ICNIRP is often criticized of the lack of involvement of medical doctors or environmental physicians in his work. What will you answer?
I think that the perspective from medical doctors, especially general practitioners, is first of all very important in that field. So there is people that say for themselves that they have electrohypersensitivity. So from what we know right now, there is no association of RF, EMF, and EHS. However, these people are actually suffering, so they have something. Maybe they are looking for the wrong agent. But so first of all, their perspective is very important in my view. For ICNIRP work, it's difficult to find experts that are medical doctors and are also very good with science and research and are looking into RF, EMF. So there's only very few people that out there are doing this work. For the current term, 2024-2028, we are in a very good position in terms of that. So we recruited two new commissioners, 2 medical doctors, one from Korea, Dr. Han. He is a neurosurgeon and he's the director of RF EMF program there. And Professor Alberto Modonese from Italy. He's an occupational physicist. So we also have an expert on occupational medicine to have this connection. And he has a large experience in non-ionizing radiation. I think he published over 130 papers on that topic. So these two are actually one of the rare cases that combine medical expertise and expertise in research and expertise on the exposure. So we are in a good spot, I think.
Thank you. There's a question. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, first of all, for these very interesting presentations. I'm Peter from Vodafone Germany, also an EMF officer there. I mean, it's a question I would like to address to Maria. Dose is widely spread, and I think it's a very hot topic at the moment. Do you have any information in your data and your population analysis which sort of supports those, which gives a hint for dose-like measures? Could you elaborate on that, please?
For which kind of measures did you say?
Like dose-related measures.
We cannot really measure exact the dose, but we have an indicator of dose in terms of number of hours that you keep the phone to your head, and there's no indication in Cosmos. And when we look into good high quality cancer registers, there is no indication of an increase in the incidence of glioma or other tumor types in the head. So it's so we don't see any indications.
Okay. May I'm permitted to ask a follow-up question?
Yeah.
Okay,
please.
Because Swedish colleagues, so around Kjell Hansson Malt, for example, we were discussing at an occupational level like a work lifetime dosage approach related to far higher magnetic fields, for example, with like resistance welding or something like that. So would you reckon that for those exposure scenarios there would be worthwhile looking into a detailed analysis of like a work lifetime dose approach rather than to fairly low levels at mobile phone communication scenarios? Thank you very much.
Yeah, so there are occupational studies that have been conducted on RF exposure in occupational settings that are not convincingly showing an increase in the risk with increasing cumulative exposures. So there's nothing really at the moment that would indicate that higher doses give an increase in the incidence of brain tumors or other cancers.
So thank you very much for this Q&A session. I think it was very interesting, all the questions, and I will hand over to Jack, and I think we will say an important thing.
We've got one last question we're going to try and fit in,
okay,
because we've got 1 minute left, so it'll have to be really quick answer. There was a specific question again for you, Theo. How long is the time between the exposure and the biopsies being taken? Somebody missed that information on the slide because the comment was it might take some time.
For the clinical study?
Yes. Because
1 hour and 24 hours, a different biopsy.
Okay, thank you. So I think we can wrap up this session. Thank you to all the speakers this morning, and thank you for the panel.
Okay,
we should thank you. We had I think a really interesting presentations this morning. A lot of information shared. I certainly learned some new information. I think they will continue with that for the rest of the day. The next speaker, Dr. Emilie van Deventer, is the head of the radiation program at the World Health Organization, so responsible for both ionizing and non-ionizing activities. She's talking to us today about the activities of the WHO task group on radiofrequency fields and health. Emilie.
Thank you to GSMA for the opportunity to be here today and to update you on the fate of the radiofrequency monograph from the World Health Organization. And let's see if we can put the slides. Yeah. Here I have included as co-authors of this presentation my colleague, Dr. Jos Verbeek, who is a methodologist that has been contracted to help us on this project, and also Professor Hayo Zeeb, who is the chair of the task group finalizing the monograph. first, just to put things into context, what you've heard this morning was a number of presentations regarding current research or recent research that has been done. What we do is slightly different in that we look at past research activities performed around the world, and we try to assess out of those the risks to health from a global perspective. So as for many risks in the environment, we have been asking ourselves if electromagnetic fields, and specifically radio frequency fields, pose health risks. And to do that, we handle or analyze the health risks through a classical approach of that includes health risk assessment, risk management, and risk communication. And it is, of course, very important to review and to assess the research that has been done, but also to identify and to promote research priorities and advocate for further research if and as needed. So this is also part of our remit. And then at the national level, it is, of course, important to develop policy positions that are both evidence-based and ethical. And throughout this whole process, of course, we all need to develop and disseminate public information that helps increase the understanding of the agent at risk, and in this case, electromagnetic fields. So over the years, WHO has developed a number of monographs on radiation and specifically on radio frequency fields. And this document that I'm talking to you today is, which is in process, complements two other documents that have been published assessing static fields and extremely low frequency fields. So when we talk about health risk assessment, we actually talk about 4 different steps, which are to first identify whether there is a hazard related to the specific agent, and then to assess the exposure, to define a dose-response relationship, and only with all these elements you can then do a risk characterization. And we are sometimes asked, what is the difference between what IARC is doing and what WHO is doing? So in terms of the IARC, International Agency for Research on Cancer, which is an agency of WHO, as the name says, they look at the carcinogenicity of the different agents. And so in 2011, they reviewed the radio frequency fields, and they evaluated it as having limited evidence for cancer in humans. And that was based on information about glioma and acoustic neuroma, and they classified it as a group 2B. Now, more recently, the advisory group on the priorities for IARC in that developed the plan for 20 to 24, so until this year, noted that there was new available evidence for cancer bioassays and carcinogenic mechanisms, and there were several likely informative cancer epidemiology studies that were forthcoming, and that was including, of course, COSMOS, as we heard this morning, and the Million Women Study and the Moby Kids. And so they advised to evaluate in that period, 2020 to 2024, radio frequency fields again. However, this did not happen, and they now have had another advisory group that was put together in earlier this year. And they looked at priorities for 2025 to 2029. And there they noted that there is new evidence available, and they recommended again a re-evaluation by the IARC monograph section. That would be, if they do it, it would be between 2027 and 2029. Any such meetings would be mentioned a year prior, so you would know ahead of time whether they were to do it. They follow very closely what we are doing, and they are on our meetings whenever we have one from the task group. So what the IARC has done, as mentioned, is developed this monograph with this class 2B carcinogenic classification, and they base their review on the preamble, which describes how to look at the different types of studies and how to weigh them. From a WHO perspective, in our unit, what we do is we look at all the health outcomes, not just cancer, and try to do a health risk assessment as far as the data can permit. And we use different processes when developing the recommendations and the conclusions mostly. So the objectives of this monograph is to review the scientific literature on adverse health effects from exposure to RF. We are not looking at beneficial exposure, which could be in the medical area. We also perform a health risk assessment, as I just mentioned, and the idea is also to compile a summary of national policies from around the world related to the use of radio frequency fields and devices. And finally, the final objective is to identify gaps in knowledge. The scope is radio frequency fields from 100 kilohertz to 300 gigahertz, and we are looking at public and occupational exposures, and again, not at medical exposures. The target audience for this work are policymakers at the national level. So our main constituents for WHO are the ministries of health of our member states. So these are who we mostly are targeting the work to, but also to other ministries, such as ministries of environment, ministries of labor, of telecom, and also, of course, bodies that are involved in recommending or setting exposure guidelines. And we've heard from ICNIRP, for example, earlier today. And then, of course, we work very much for and with, not for, but with professional societies and academia in this context. So what are we expecting in terms of outputs? We're expecting, first of all, to develop a scoping, or to publish a scoping review, a number of systematic reviews, and these are the basics that will inform the environmental health criteria monograph. And then, separately from that, we will develop a research agenda. So first of all, in terms of the scoping review, I just have to explain to you a little bit quickly the fact that we started this work in 2012. The original work was done and with quite a bit of strict criteria. But in 2016, WHO requested that the work be done more systematically. And so this original document is what we now are calling the scoping review. And this is ad posteriori, we figured out that this work very much fit the definition of what a scoping review is, which is a very good tool actually when it comes to identify a scope or scope a body of literature or clarify certain concepts. And it can be a very helpful precursor to a systematic review. And also it can confirm the relevance of potential questions like the PECO questions and inclusion criteria. So the main difference between a scoping review and a systematic review is shown here. In a scoping review, you do not have to register a protocol, to develop a protocol and register it. And you don't usually do a risk of bias assessment on the studies at hand. So this is the main difference, and this is why this major work that was done over 1,000 pages can be called a scoping review, and will be definitely the basis for the monograph to come. This scoping report includes 16 chapters that have already been written up, and a number of appendices that are full of information. These are looking at all the published studies in terms of in vitro, animal and human experimental studies, as well as observational or epidemiological studies. And these will be published together with the monograph. The contributors to this work include Professor Feychting, whom you've heard from this morning, Professor Oftedal from Norway, Dr. Erik van Rongen, Maria Scarfi, Simon Mann from the UK Health Security Agency, and we had Professor Zmiru, who since retired on the topic of public health, and since 2016, when WHO requested systematic reviews, we enlisted the help of Dr. Jos Verbeek as our methodologist. And this core group actually enlisted over 30 contributors. So there are several people in this room that I recognize as having helped in the development of this document. Now, in terms of the systematic reviews that were commissioned, this has been a huge amount of work over the past 5 years. We first had to figure out what topics we would systematically review, because we could not look at every health outcome that has been studied. First of all, it would take way too much time and way too much money. So we first had an international survey of, we sent that to over 300 RF experts to help prioritize the health outcomes. And they came back with their assessment, either from a scientific perspective, a public concerned perspective, and cancer came high in the list, together with heat-related outcomes, fertility, symptoms, and cognitive functions, and including also oxidative stress as a possible mechanism. So given these top priorities, we then commissioned the work. We asked for teams to be formed, and we secured the funding for the activities. And finally, we had these 6 priorities that are shown here in terms of different, the 10 systematic review teams that were to perform them. So for cancer, we had a team, we have a team looking at observational studies and another team looking at animal studies. For adverse reproductive outcomes, we had also a team looking at epi studies and one at animal studies. For cognitive impairment, we had observational studies as well as human volunteer studies. Here, of course, we don't have animal studies. And same for symptoms, where we had one systematic review on observational studies of symptoms and one on human volunteers. For oxidative stress, we looked at experimental studies, and we had a 10th systematic review on heat-related outcomes, such as pain, burns, and cataract. But this finally, unfortunately, did not come through. We worked very hard with them on the protocol, but this was not to be finalized with that team. And we had a very hard time finding other groups that could do this kind of work. So this is very interesting to note. And I think that it's an important gap, because this is what all the limits are based on, which is heat-related problems. Okay, so from a WHO perspective, what is very important also when we put together groups of experts is, first of all, that they do not have conflicts of interest. So we're very careful about this. For the task group, for example, when we put the task group together, it took us nearly a year to ensure that the experts were cleared. So it's a huge endeavor, and we have 9 systematic review teams, about over 80 experts from around the globe. And an important aspect for WHO is to have equitable representation, both from a geographical perspective, but also from a gender perspective, as far as possible, of course. And so this is why on this map, I do include the gender distribution as well. Now, what we asked from these teams was that they submit a protocol in the journal Environment International, and we secured a special issue on this topic. And so all the systematic reviews published first a protocol. And this, at first we thought, oh, maybe it's going to take too much time away from the project. But at the end of the day, it was the best idea, because it really put down on paper what they were expecting to do. And then when finalizing the systematic review, they had to explain in every paper if there were any deviation from the protocol. And they also had to register the protocol in Prospero or another such database. So where we're at in this respect, in terms of the protocols, the 9 protocols, finally, they all have been published in 21-22. And then in terms of the systematic reviews, we have had an amazing amount of work from these teams. And at present, you can see the number of systematic reviews. So they all have been published, besides 2 of them related to cancer. So out of 3, 2 of them are still missing. And this is our hurdle at the moment. But you can see for some topics, like for fertility, we had 2 publications for observational studies and 2 for experimental studies. And the last one, which was mentioned, I think, by Theo earlier, on oxidative stress, I think is still in pre-proof. It's not the final version in terms of the design, but the information is there in the special issue. So I will not really go through all the conclusions for these systematic reviews, but first to say maybe that for cancer, the first, the part 1 paper was published very recently, just last month, and it is about most researched outcomes, which really includes brain outcomes, and the second one has been submitted and is in the revision process, and we hope to have it within the next couple of months. But we have one of the co-author in the room, so if there's any questions, I will send them back to you, Dan. The second paper, the second systematic review on cancer in animals is also has been submitted. And we have at present, unfortunately, not a good idea of when it will, if and when it will be published. And the papers on fertilities have both been published and show, as well as many of the other systematic reviews, that there is a lot of the information is very weak. And for a number of conclusions, we have moderate to low or very low certainty. This is the case also for cognition in terms of observational studies in the long term and experimental studies for acute exposures. For symptoms, there again, very low certainty evidence for the observational studies, and low and up to high certainty for the experimental studies of symptom related to acute exposures in experimental settings. And finally, the systematic review on oxidative stress that came out just a couple months ago shows no real evidence for or against a relationship between RF EMF and biomarkers of oxidative stress. And what they mentioned in their conclusion is that you would need drastic improvements in the studies to actually be able to come up with a better outcome. So these are important systematic reviews. A lot of work has been done in developing them. They are performed by individual experts. They are commissioned by WHO, but that doesn't mean that WHO agrees with the conclusions. So that's an important aspect to realize. They will form the basis of what the task group will work on, but this is the work of these teams. And since these systematic reviews have been published, there has been a number of, well, few critical appraisals of the systematic reviews, actually fewer than I was expecting. But for SR8, there was a correspondence in Environment International questioning some of the work, and this has been responded to, and this is fine. This is part of the normal process. But we had two papers related to SR4 on fertility and SR7 on symptoms that were actually commented on and criticized in a different journal. And this is not the normal ethical process in science. In a different journal, which is a journal of reviews on environmental health. And it's interesting because there's a criticism of the methods, and this is why we publish protocols ahead of time. If when reading the protocol you can flag a potential problem, this is the moment to actually mention it. It is not at the end of the systematic review when you don't like the results that you criticize the work. And also there's criticism on the researchers, which is completely against publishing ethics. So that the journal should have been more careful about these aspects. Thirdly, and most importantly, is the monograph that is to come. And we have put together a task group that is to draw conclusions on the effects of RF exposure on all the health outcomes. Now they will have to take all these different pieces of information from the different types of studies, weigh them together, and then come up with overall conclusions for a specific outcome. They will always also have to develop the overall health risk assessment for each of these outcomes and identify gaps in knowledge. And finally, they will also help us by reviewing the national good practice intervention that we are surveying through the different countries. So this task group is made up of 20 experts, including the chair, from most regions of the world. And we've had a number of meetings so far. The work started in January last year, so January 2023. We had a first face-to-face meeting to kick off the project in March, so about a year and a half ago. And we've had a number of online meetings, monthly meetings, and so on. You may recognize some of the people here. And as I mentioned, we've always invited our colleagues from IARC, so they are fully briefed on what we are doing. And this task group has set up some smaller working group, for example, on exposures or on observational studies. And they have drafted the chapters. They have come up with conclusions. These conclusions have, we've had a polling of the conclusions, and so far they are very well agreeable to the conclusions. However, on the topics that are related to the systematic reviews, we're still not finished, and especially the elephant is in the room is, of course, the cancer chapter, for which we need the systematic reviews. This I just mentioned, conclusions have been developed, the poll have been performed, and we're still awaiting the systematic reviews on cancer, 2 of them. Finally, we will have a chapter on radio frequency field policies, which will be a compilation of national regulations from around the world and good practice interventions. We are setting up a survey with our member states following the questionnaire that we used in 2012 that will serve as a baseline. Just this is my final slide to say that, of course, we have been looking for all these years at the effect of electromagnetic fields on human health, but there are, of course, other aspects, as mentioned earlier today, that we have to take into account, and that may be actually really drowning this topic. So with this, I would like to thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Emilie. The elephant is in the room. It's there at the wall. Okay, so my question is, at the end, the monograph will concern radio frequency fields, irrelevant of how they expose humans, right? Because in IARC, I'm a little bit disappointed, because back in 2011, the first press release was that we examined environmental fields, we examined radars, we examined Wi-Fi's, we examined mobile phones, and we think that mobile phone radiation leads to 2B, okay? And then they come up 2 years later in Lancet and they say we categorize radio frequency fields into 2B, whereas environmental fields were kind of not exonerated, but they said we didn't have enough data to categorize environmental fields. So how are you going to treat the different types of exposure, like low level, lifetime exposure, and high level, perhaps acute or short time exposure? Are you going to distinguish between the use of radiofrequency fields and the potential endpoints or the effects they have? Because for me, they are different exposure situations, and they should be all, of course, treated. If I look at fertility, for example, your systematic review, they refer to mobile phones, okay? And then with women, they refer to microwave diathermy. Base stations are not there, but if I go to a public hearing, they will tell me, look, the monograph of WHO, IARC, they have categorized radiofrequency fields in probably or potentially carcinogenic, but this categorization was based on a specific use or implementation of exposure to radiofrequency fields. So how are we going to explain to the people that different uses might not lead to that health endpoint? There is no risk from different uses.
Yeah, this is a very good question. We are looking at the different, each health outcome and describing the exposure that we have for each of these health outcomes. And this is in terms of high, medium, and low, but also with respect to the limits that we have, the recommendations for the limits. Yeah.
Any questions in the room? I don't see any online at the moment. Maybe I'll ask one then, Emilie. You mentioned that your main audience is ministries of health, and Theo asked the question there about how the IAC outcome was published and notified. Is there a communications plan that will follow from the finalization of the task group that will raise awareness but also ensure understanding of what the outcomes say?
Yeah, there is communications plans, mostly for policymakers, but also for other stakeholders. Of course, the public, because, you know, I think we saw that with the publication of the systematic review, the first systematic review on cancer, I think you all heard about it in the news. So definitely this will be put in place by WHO at the corporate level. And will include information for the public in terms of fact sheets and I'm hoping a press release, but in WHO we have so many press releases and so many topics to cover that we will have to see what is happening in the world at that point in time.
I think we've got a question at the back of the room.
Yes, I would like to comment quickly on the question of Theo. Just what we did for cancer and observational studies. So we looked at different evidence streams. We looked at near field exposure with mobile phones, but we also looked at far field exposure with broadcast transmitters and base stations. There's just less studies on that. So the evidence is not so strong compared to mobile phones, but we looked at broadcast transmitters and glioma, and from what we see in observational epidemiological studies, there is no observed link. There is no association. However, the certainty in the evidence is less compared to mobile phones, just because the studies and the quality are not that good, and there's just less.
Thank you. A last call for questions, comments before we go to the panel. Then one last one from me, Emilie, then before we let you go. If I look at the 1993 document, which is the last DHC on radio frequency fields, there's no mention of mobile phones. I'm just wondering how this document will be forward-looking in terms of what it will mean for 6G, 7G. We might be at 20G in 30 years' time before the next EHC is done on radio frequency fields, if there is one.
Yeah, it's a good question, but we at WHO don't have the crystal ball. And the job here is to assess the evidence that's already published.
Thank you for that answer, and thank you again for your presentation. So I'll just introduce Sami Gabriel, who's from Vodafone and another deputy chair of the GSMA EMF and Health Group, to lead the next panel. Sami.
Thank you very much, Jack. I'll introduce the 5 speakers that we have for this panel. Firstly, Tero Onishi, who will be joining us online in a moment. He works for the National Institute of Information, Communications and Technology in Japan, and is currently the chair of the International Electrotechnical Committee's Committee 106, looking after RF exposure and EMF issues. As well, on the standardization side, we have Christophe Granger, who works for Nokia. He is leading the work stream for for base stations and assessment methodologies within the IEC working groups. Then we have Arouk Jouad, working for the French Spectrum Agency, ANFR. He is an expert on the statistical analysis of field data, especially when RF exposure is assessed in populations. Then we will have Dr. Lydia Stepinski Stasia, who will be joining us as an expert on public policy and public communications. She has extensive experience within both academia and industry on communicating with the public about technology. And then we will have Wood Joseph from Ghent University, who's an expert in antenna characterization and design, and especially for indoor schemes. So he will be an expert on how deployment is also carried out. So if I may ask them to come and join me up on the stage, please. So I'll first invite each of the speakers to say a few words about their field. So maybe Tero to start.
So Theo from NICT Japan, and I'm chair of the TC106 since this May. The term of my chairmanship is 6 years, and I will report so the EMF exposure assessment method within the TC106. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Christophe?
Okay, I am Christophe Grandchat. I am leading Nokia EMF mitigation team. I'm also convener of the IEC TC106 MT3 working group, which is developing the base station assessment standards, and we'll hear more in the afternoon. And you see there are some probes around that will be used this afternoon for the demo, so that people can practice and ask questions about how to assess 5G signal exposure.
Hello, everybody. So my name is Ourouk Jawad. I work at INFR. It's the French national administration in charge of the public exposure studies. So as you may know, maybe INFR make a lot of EMF measurement simulation, but also market surveillance activities regarding specific absorption rate.
Hello everybody, I'm Wout Joseph from Ghent University and IMEC, and we are working on exposure assessment of 5G base stations and also 6G systems.
Hello, I'm Lidia Stępińska-Ustasiak. I'm part of T-Mobile Poland team responsible for public policies and public affairs, but I had the chance and privilege of working for Polish regulator at the time when we were collaborating closely with ITU in the area of standardization of EMF.
Mm-hmm. So really now the floor is open to any questions to the panel. And really the focus here is we've had 5G in particular rolled out, in use, established over a very large global footprint for many years. Well, at least the last 5 years that we're looking back over now. Have the issues that were anticipated actually occurred? We can hear from the panel their first-hand experience on what they have seen in the rollout process, the public communications, the actual RF exposure level. So historically, we've had a lot of data collected over that time. We're going to be looking later on this afternoon at live data coming in to compare as well. Any questions?
Thank you. Yes, I would be interested in a kind of summary of main aspects in terms of evolution of measurements related to 5G outcome.
Yeah, Christophe.
For me. So in terms of measurement of 5G of base stations in general, methods are in place since the end or beginning of the year 2000. But as we move forward, when we began, the exposure was assessed based on the configured maximum of the base station, based on kind of maximum possible transmitted power. And what we observed with 5G is that in reality, the beams are changing direction, are varying in time. And this is why we introduced in the last edition of IEC 62232 methods based on the actual maximum approach, which we will explain a little bit more in details this afternoon. But in a nutshell, these methods allow for a more accurate assessment corresponding to the real usage of the base station, I would say.
Theo?
In fact, I would have one question for each of the members of the panels, but I don't want to take all the time. First of all, I would like to ask Teruo to tell us a little bit more about the first FR2 millimeter wave measurements from a commercial system in Japan that were published in this issue of Electromagnetics. I have to advertise a little bit because they are the first measurements that we have from millimeter wave systems, and these are deployed in Japan. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about what they have measured, how well below they are from the limits and so on. And to Dr. Ustasiak, I would like to ask her about Poland. Poland was one of the countries that recently actually harmonized with ICNIRP. What was the public response to this change of limits, the harmonization, and if it affected at all 5G deployment? Because the harmonization was for 4G, but now how did it affect also 5G deployment?
So maybe first Tero?
Yes. So this is actually this is out of the TC106 chair, but I want to respond to your question that regarding the measurement for the 28 gigahertz in Japan. So the results show that even though the millimeter wave use, so the electric field exposure level is not so much compared to the 4G system. So this is our results, and I think that this results show that millimeter wave FR2 base stations will be helpful to deploy so much, but this is not the case in the town. So I'm not sure that this is the answer to you.
Can read also the paper in Electromagnetics.
Okay. Thank you.
Maybe I can also add, we did also measurements of FR2 was indoor in a real network in Sweden. And like Teruo says, but it's really challenging. It's much more challenging than the FR1. So we measured line of sight and non-line of sight. And to measure non-line of sight, you have to use special equipment. So with the classical spectrum analyzer, sensitivity is borderline. So we used a decoder and so on. Yeah, and the values, this is, I'm talking about distances from 9 to 15 meters, but was less than 2% of ICNIRP. But the main thing is how to measure, which with horn antennas directive, and also and these new scanner systems, but these dedicated systems are also very useful at FR2. But as you said yourself, whether FR2 will be in Belgium or in some European countries, that's something else.
Yes, thank you for this question. The case of Poland, I would say, is a kind of success story, but the way was long and hard because 5 years ago we had the level of limits 100 times lower than recommended by ICNIRP. And it was a consequence of being part of Soviet Union bloc. Some of you know this situation very well. Historically, and the dedicated decree of Minister of Health was issued at the end of 2019 and came into force at the beginning of 2020. And I would say that in a public perspective, it didn't change a lot. I mean that at the time, we observed a lot of protests against the building base stations, but it is still a problem. And I think what is necessary is building public trust to technologies, because when we talk about new technologies, whatever it is, 5G, 6G, AI, whatever. Technologies are widely diffused and used only when are trusted. So building public trust is, in my opinion, the role of national agencies, ministries of digital affairs, because as operators, we are not trusted in this discussion, because the public perception is that, of course, we will convince everyone that it is safe because we want money from telecommunication services. And this is our perspective and our view, which in fact is not entirely true. But of course, there is other dimension, which is deployment of 5G. The decision, the decree opened the door for 5G deployment and allowed to decrease the level of investment in 4G. But at that time, it was purely a theoretical possibility, because as we had to wait 3 years for 5G auction in Poland.
Thank you. Mike, you had a question?
Hi, Mike Wood from Telstra in Australia and chair of GSMA EMF Group. The experience of the 5 years of 5G EMF evaluations, we heard before, I think, with Theo's presentation, that we've seen compared to 4G that the efficiency of the 5G technology has increased. The data throughput has got higher or more efficient, and the realistic levels, because of that, because of the efficiency, have actually reduced. It's interesting listening to the experience in Poland that, you know, there's still a public trust issue. I just wonder who on the panel can comment on, you know, the role of, say, government authorities, or how the assessments are being used by governments, maybe even with ANFR, to build that public trust, because the standards can be written, the methodologies can be updated. I just wonder, now that we've seen the EMF levels reducing, is the public starting to get used to that, or are they not really as concerned anymore? I'd be very interested in some of the answers.
Maybe, yeah, I can answer to that maybe. So what do you need to answer to all the concern and question from the public? I think that government needs a large amount of measurement and evidence to first explain how it works, and also to show the level measured or assessed by numerical simulations. And I would say, what is the amount? The question is, what is the amount of measurement that you need? I think a great amount is good, but I think that also it's proportional to the number of critics that you get, and especially, I mean, I know in France we have many critics, so we do a lot of measurement to try to answer to these critics, I think that we try to answer to public concern, because there is different type of just question, fear, activists. So a large amount of measurement and education can help to handle these questions.
If I may add something. Well, in Poland, Chief Inspectorate for Environmental Protection is responsible for regular measurement, and they do this. They publish results. Additionally, we have a working group responsible for education under the umbrella of Polish Chamber of Informatics and Telecommunication, and it also works well. But it is not sufficient, particularly when we have a look at so active propaganda and misinformation from the East, I mean from Russia. We observe that the same Twitter in the past and X now, the same accounts are spreading fake news about COVID, about Ukraine, and about 5G. So we have no chance as chambers, as MNOs, to reply effectively for these kinds of activities. Only coordinated actions, coordinated at the national level, can help.
Okay, just one last comment.
Yes, maybe to add on Uruk's response, I would say that in order to restore confidence, it's also the role of standardization, because today measurements are done in a similar way in France, in Poland, in Australia, and there is a common basis and a common way of practice. And this provides a high degree of confidence in the results, I believe. That's the role of IEC 62232. And to answer to Theo Samaras' question on millimeter wave in the technical report, you will see also a number of case studies addressing FR2 measurements.
Yeah, thank you. We'll take another question. Michael?
Yes, so I'm Michael Schüller. I'm working with 1N1, a German mobile network operator. And my question reflects, let's say, 20 years ago. 20 years ago, we had a clear view. The biological effects were, there was need for research. There were different interpretations in different countries. But physics and EMF measurements and calculation was relatively clear at that time. If I look at this question today, I noticed that even in respect to the technical point of view, the calculation and the measurement of EMF, we see in the IEC standard that we have the realistic power and we have the theoretical maximum. We see that the German regulator has a specific calculation method, probably others also have. We see, and this is just a media report, perhaps the French colleagues on the plenary can comment on this. We read in the newspapers that there were disputes with the French regulator and Apple regarding the specific absorption rate of different types of mobile phones. And my question is, if this differentiation is real and not only my personal view on the current situation, are there efforts to bring these things together? So the standardization, the usage of the standardization by the regulators and applying it to the EMF assessment, and the communication to the general public. So it makes it even worse if not only the interpretation of the medical and health relevance is different, but also the interpretation of the exposure. Thank you.
Okay, so again, even if the topic today is not specifically on the devices, I can answer that to avoid this type of discussion regarding the non-compliance, the protocol used. The answer again, I think, is the technical standardization, because if we have detailed measurement procedure shared by all the parties, regulator, manufacturer, test lab, and also R&D lab, we have a common language to use between each other. Everybody has interest to have common procedure, and I think that it also it helps for two things. First, that the engineering problem are solved by engineers and not lawyers, and the second step is to when you collect again a good science, good data, it's easier to educate the public with this data.
And the base station standards are separate from this discussion and are approved by 100% national committees.
But
So
I think
it's a different topic.
I think it's fair to say that the point really is that with good standardization, it builds a lot of public confidence but it also makes it a lot easier for the industry to implement if everyone has exactly a level playing field to work from.
Yeah, and on top of that, in Belgium we have really strict limits, and we have 3 governments. But anyway, they're strict, but they follow this IEC standard. So science and different research groups gave input to the standard, has been realized. But if you now have to do measurements for governments, different Belgian governments, the basis is IEC standards. With, for instance, the 1 gigabyte file and the maximum and the no exposure. So the three parts need to be assessed. So even where it's really strict, the standards are advised by the governments.
Okay, thank you. We've got another question here. Murray?
Yeah, Murray, Rowley Telecom. Just following up on this whole issue about public trust and everything, I think it's undoubtedly the case that there's a huge amount of really high quality research gone into this whole subject, and a lot of information and knowledge has been created. But I think we live in a world that's got more information than it needs, and a lot of that information is not truthful. And I'm wondering what initiatives might exist. I think doing more studies and more research is going to make any difference to public perception. And so what initiatives do exist or could exist that would try to bridge a gap between not the loony fringe who are on Twitter and X, but people like Leonard Hardell, who behind the Bioinitiative report, people like that have academic qualifications, who are providing an awful lot of the alternative facts, if you want to call them that, on the whole subject of the safety of EMF. Is there any way that there could be some kind of joint initiative where people that claim to be objective are actually starting off from the same point and saying, well, what do we need to investigate? Rather than what I see at the moment, which is what I think is some very high quality research being done in this forum versus what appears to be very low quality research in some other areas. And then the public then are presented with these 2 different sets of information and are unable to tell which one is credible. So I do think that some of these people on the alternative end are sincere, but I think that their methods are definitely open to criticism. So is there any effort to try and bridge that gap, or is it going to remain that each side is going to pile up their data and then try and win the war based on who's got the most papers or whatever?
Mm-hmm. Okay, let me put that to the panel.
Yes. So in France, we have a national committee where INFR answer to the questions of association that have questions on the EMF. The industry participates to this committee, also politics, national health agency, and this committee takes place 2 times per year. And year after year, we see now that we directly answer to the question of the association by providing some studies, or based on the state-of-the-art publication on EMF. So it helps a lot to have a direct discussion with all the parties, national administration, us, the industry, network provider, and the association, the public.
I think the problem is that we have different kinds of group of people we should convince that 5G is safe because there are different levels of knowledge. For some scientifically grounded argumentation will be sufficient, but for the most skeptical, it will be not sufficient. In some cases, people do not understand that there is a connection between quality of internet and base stations' existence. For example, in one small town in Poland where base station was burned, people who did it were really surprised that there is significant decrease in quality of internet. In some cases, very basic level of technical knowledge is really necessary. But in general, I think that there is a need to educate people about the role of 5G and 6G in future and tell them that it is not a magic dragon or something we should be afraid of, but it is just a technology like television was in 60s or I don't know, printing ages ago. And it is applicable and useful for individuals, for societies. It will help us to keep European economy competitive, etc., etc. Just simple argumentation explaining why it is useful and for what.
Okay, so yeah, I've got a couple of online questions that I'm going to merge and then maybe direct to the left side of the panel. So the question's about what you see when you measure base station exposures in terms of average exposures and peak exposures, and also to comment on different approaches. For example, Ofcom puts up a meter and it measures what's there in the environment. Other countries will use a phone to direct the beam to where you're making a measurement. Is it always necessary to do that sort of extrapolation to some sort of a worst case situation?
Christoph?
So, as I introduced briefly, the difference with 5G and previous technologies is that the beams are changing direction. And the traffic is varying as well. So we have these two parameters, which we need to take into account to extrapolate to the maximum value when doing a measurement. So in IEC 62232, we have developed a number of methods in order to address this. One approach is to use a mobile phone and to generate traffic in one direction when we do the measurement. And then we do what we call extrapolation, which is we take the part of the signal that is stable and we extrapolate to the maximum configured value. I will say a few words about that this afternoon, and there will be a detailed presentation by Manfred to explain. So this can be done by taking or adding around the measurement points mobile phones, downloading traffic in order to increase exposure. This can also be done by implementing what we call test nodes on the base station, which generate artificial traffic at full load in one particular direction. So all methods are available and are part of they are discussed in part of the technical report 62669, and Ofcom has implemented some ANFR as well, so that we see this improving, and IMEC has also used some methods in Belgium. So we see a lot of activities among regulators to improve the method, improve the accuracy, so that accurate results can be established.
Thanks. Maybe I'll just add, because I'm not sure I asked the question clearly enough. So that's great for establishing compliance zone boundaries, but I think the question was about when you're communicating to the public, the levels that they experience around a base station. Is it the average you measure without a phone? Is it when you measure it with the phone? What makes sense in terms of that communication?
Maybe Aruk, sort of from your side, when you go out and do the measurements, what are the numbers that you report? Is it averages, maximum, minimums?
Okay. Okay. So our protocol is in 3 steps. So we make a broadband measurement over the entire spectrum, frequency selective also measurement. Both are ISO 17025 accredited measurement, free of charge. So any citizen can ask for a measurement. And there is a third step where the technician uses a phone connected to the base station antenna, and it downloads a 1 gigabyte file. We made a 5G campaign where we selected 1,000 position in front of 1,000 base station antenna, and we measured. We made this measurement before the launch of 5G, and we repeated this 1,000 measurement 6 times since the launch of the 5G. So in total, it's 7,000 measurements. And what we notice is that there is an increase of the global level of exposure of 17%. If you look through at the main 5G band 3.4 gigahertz to 3.8 gigahertz, the increase is about 0.33 volt per meter without any loading of the base station, and yes, so let's stop on this number, 0.33 volt per meter. Is it high or low? If we compare to other bands, we assess the number of times that the 3.5 gigahertz band was the main contribution to the overall exposure level, and it's only 8% of the time. Most of the time, it's the historical bands which are the main contribution, give the main contribution 800, 900, 1800 megahertz. And about the exploratory measurement, when we use a load profile of 1 gigabyte file, it's interesting because the level are very low. But there is, like, we found that, and the report is about to be published on INFR website in French. Sorry. When you compare the level of exposure without download to the level of exposure with download, the level are low, but there is the level is 4 times higher when you download a file, average over 6 minutes, compared to the case where you don't download. So the last 1,000 measurement that I look, you had 0.25 volt per meter without download and 1 volt per meter with download. So this is all the data that we give to that we provide to the public.
Thank you. Another question on the right.
Well, thank you very
Peter.
much. Peter from Vodafone Germany. Going a bit back to Mike's question, I think this remark is valuable, so that I would like to pose it. A few years ago, the German government set up an initiative called Germany Talks 5G, something like that, and it was a broad initiative over different governmental areas, so like the economic affairs, employment, environment, and so on. And that gained a lot of trust because the general population could approach this initiative with questions and doubts and whatever. And they were like equally treated on eye level. The questions were answered properly. And that also affected, when I was working for the government in this occupational safety area, that also affected the trustees of employees at the workplace with sources of electromagnetic fields. So that has had a really nice impact in society, and perhaps then you can talk about the future of this program later on. But so this was very important to sort of get this 5G trust on the roads in Germany, and it also targeted policymakers. So when having like an initiative to set up a base station in a village or town, you have those like question and answer sessions there with the general population, and so that really eased the troubles. So, but my question I would like, this is to Uruk, when having like reports of people putting like measurements in their backpacks and walking across the countries, reporting instantaneous measurements of like some volts per meters, what is the actual purpose of that in terms of comparing it to like all those relationships that we had in earlier talks, when we have like dependencies of the time of the day, when we have dependencies of the season, when so like different dependencies, and then you have like this one spot measurement walking through the country. So how is there any point in doing that?
Yeah. Sometimes you need a specific recipe to answer to a specific need. And I think that this diversity of type of measurement can answer to different questions. Before installing this probe all over in France, we had questions from good questions actually from some associations saying, okay, you do EMF measurement at people houses, but you come between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. What about during the night? What about, so actually to answer to this data, you need the night data to compare it to the evening data and saying, okay, during the night there is nothing actually. So in order to scientifically explore some dimensions, you need some specific type of measurement, such as probe measurement, but also monitoring in the backpack, for instance, in areas where it's difficult to make some measurement, like about in public transportation, for instance. So I think it's each question needs a specific answer and a measurement recipe, if I can say.
Thank you. Yeah, we've got another question at the back.
Thank you. My name is Margot Morsink. I'm with the Dutch government. My question is a follow-up from what was asked by Mike on the other side of the room, and maybe also the comment of Peter. As a policy maker, I find it often difficult to strike a balance between proactively communicating about EMF or maybe just responding to questions that arise. And I heard Dr. Stasiak say, the building trust has to come from national bodies. So I heard that loud and clear. And I was wondering, maybe from the experience from Poland, maybe also France, would you recommend going about this more proactively? Because sometimes that also leads to questions, why are they communicating about this so proactively? Or maybe more reactive if there are questions. We often have consultations about specific bands, and then a lot of responses come in which raise concerns about EMF. What kind of model would you recommend? Maybe the more German model with a forum for questions, or more reactive? What are your experiences? But also happy to hear from everyone on the panel what their recommendation would be for a policymaker. Thank you.
Yes, I think I understand the concern that we should find the balance between proactive communication of health issues and safety, because the more we talk about it, some people can understand it opposite, that we have something to hide. And so that's why I said that wide public campaign should be more focused on benefits, and the safety can be a part of it, but in the background, not as a main key message in such educational campaign. This is my view. And of course, additionally, we should have prepared materials a responsive communication based on documents prepared by World Health Organization, ITU, chambers, associations. There is a lot of knowledge scientifically grounded, and we can use it, but in my view, it should be more reactive communication than proactive.
Any other question?
I'll ask one online question, Sami, if I may. So a question from India, so it's a two-parter. In India, we have a common EMF exposure reporting portal. Are there any other countries that have similar common websites for reporting compliance information for base stations? And then the second part is, what is the status of the IEC approach based on compliance on the actual maximum approach versus existing approaches based on theoretical maximums, like is in some of the ITU documents? Maybe, I know that Christoph is involved in the ITU documents. He might like to comment on that part.
Shall we start with the second part?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so the new methods based on the actual maximum approach for compliance assessment of base stations has started to be introduced in the technical report in 2019. It's been fully standardized in IEC 62232 in 2022, and it will be confirmed in edition 4 that will be published by the end of this year. So it's fully established, and the technical report is just providing implementation methods or case studies so that people get more familiar with its implementation. And at the same time, ITU has endorsed this method in 2 documents adopted in June this year. So ITU TK100 and ITU TK52. And these 2 documents are very important because they are referenced in a number of countries like Brazil or India, where the question comes from, but other countries. So these 2 documents, ITU TK100 and ITU TK52, are fully aligned with IEC 62232. It is just that they include the building principles, and people, experts doing assessment can go to IEC 62232 for the details. But they are fully aligned. And CNELEC is currently also in the process of adopting these methods in its 2 standards, EN 5401 and 5385, which I hope will be published in 2025.
Thank you. For the first part of the question, I guess we're going to look at extensive information available on the GSMA website.
Thank you for that promotion, Sami.
Yeah. About the information, actually, we of course provide on a regular basis some report analyzing all the measurement done in France, but we also have a website called cartoradio.fr. Send me an email if you want to say. I will send you the address. And on this, actually, it's a map of France with all the base station antennas with many information on it, the network provider, azimuthal direction, frequency, technology, and so on. But also, the citizen can find the results of all the measurement made since we began to make some accredited measurement. So this type of information, this website is one of INFR which is the most visited, I think.
And you have that also in Belgium and in the Netherlands. I see my Dutch colleagues. These are all available. You just click, get the PDF, and get all the data.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Hello, I'm Robin. I'm a PhD student, part of the CLUH cluster. So for my question, I need to give a little bit of context before. In my research, I do a lot of simulations where I try to be as realistic as possible. And this is also what we try to do in the projects of ClueH. A problem with these simulations is that we don't have realistic data to do those simulations. For example, configurations of base stations, their patterns, and receiving devices. This is not public, of course. So I gave a talk at BioEM, it's a premier conference on bioelectromagnetics, and there was a lot of support for generally increasing the cooperation between industry and the academic community. So there were a number of people, prominent scientists in the research community that have signed for the initiative, including from the BioEM board. There's support from Goliath. And in general, people, you can talk about this with me. There's a website as well, outreachinitiative.info. Now, my question to you is, I have two questions. First for Dr. Javat and Professor Joseph. Do you think this is important? And for the others, would telecom operators be open to sharing more data under, of course, private NDAs? Now, it wouldn't have to be on a website, but I think it's crucial to improve the corporations so we have more reliable, realistic simulations. Thank you.
Can you repeat what was important? What is important? What do you think?
You mean the second question?
The first part.
No, I was wondering, in general, do you think this initiative is important? Do you think that do you stand behind it? And for the others, do you think, as telecom operators, would you be open to sharing more data privately so we can perform our simulations more realistically?
I think yes, to do to get the best tools to make accurate numerical simulation is of course a good idea. It will help all the community to assess the EMF level.
What? Any comments?
Yeah.
I think the main question is to the industrial partners.
Well, if I comment in general, it is if the sharing of more data can make the quality of the research better, then it's a benefit to everyone. How easy it is to actually manage and do that is another step, but the principle of it is admirable. Okay, another question on the right.
Janice Sanchez with BIAB Solutions. I would like to take advantage of the tremendous expertise on this table for a quick look at the short-term, mid-term future in terms of testing methodologies, especially considering the changes that we should expect in the 5G networks coming tomorrow, starting very soon. There's been some talk about millimeter wave. Maybe what that means exactly is in terms of how these measurements are going to be more directional, less isotropical. There's going to be other considerations for millimeter wave. The beamforming is going to be much more complex, what that means for measurements. Carrier aggregation is going to be probably a factor in those frequency ranges. We're going to have now channels that they're going to be 200, 300, maybe 400 megahertz in the future. But also for the, let's say, more normal 5G networks that we can see today, I think in many markets, we are now in a stage of densification, let's call it that way. So we're going to have more and more antennas surrounding us. Code selective measurements, I think, make a lot of sense for the reasons already explained. But how is that be combined with the reality of having more signals coming to you from different angles with this densification? There's also the introduction in many countries of new capabilities, new features in base stations, like smart power locks, these type of things. That going to require also some levels of verification. So just basically to pick up your minds on how do you see these testing methodologies moving forward in the near future, but probably in the short term in many aspects, and to accommodate to these changes in the networks that we're going to see next. I don't want to go into non-terrestrial networks and things like that, because that we will never finish here today probably.
Yeah, so first, with the current frequencies, FR1, so 3.5 gigahertz bands, it's getting more complicated just because there are users now. So like 3-4 years ago, we have to assess the maximum. What do we do? We load the base station, maximum traffic, and we get the maximum. But what we see nowadays is that people starting having these phones, and while we do the measurements, they also communicate. And then we don't even get at the maximum anymore. So it's more difficult because these beams share, and the power per beam is in lower. So there are two solutions for that. What we currently do is, or you have collaboration with some network providers and vendors. They can create a maximum then, or you work with what we do nowadays is with multiple mobile phones instead of one, and download it and really try to get the maximum. But we see this, to get the maximum, it's more difficult and it gets lower. You can imagine a scenario in the future in a railway station with hundreds of users, and you will never get the maximum anymore because everybody's using his or her mobile phone at that moment. So that's currently really happening, and for the current situation. And when you were asking about the FR2, this is really challenging. Line of sight, this can work, I already mentioned it, but non-line of sight, you need these decoders. With spectrum analyzer, so we did, for instance, these measurements, and we could not, we just can measure the dominant control signals, and then for extrapolation. With these decoders, you can do that, but of course it's another equipment, it's dedicated, and it's not something as a government will do. This is more like a research way of handling it. And you talked about directive antennas. So your measurement system, if you measure, normally you do omnidirectional probe you use, but at FR2, this will underestimate the exposure measurements. So we advise now to use, and also Ericsson does that, with horn antennas to do the measurements and then have different polarizations and so on and make the total of that. So this makes it much more complicated and also time consuming to assess this.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yes,
a final comment on this. If you're asking about what are the next steps in standardization, I think we'll start a new phase in next year. So it's a question we have started to investigate. Basically, there is still a lot to do to secure the implementation of the actual maximum approach in terms of validating it, testing it, etc. So that's one area of improvement. Second area of improvement is the variability of the base stations will increase with 6G, with new frequency bands, with extreme massive MIMO. So that's something that will need to be addressed. And going together with it is a multi-band frequency assessment and how to do the summation and measure the summation of all bands together. And that's, I think, part of the working area for the next 5 years of standardization.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for all of the questions. And if we can just show our appreciation for the panel here, Toru Onishi online, and the panel here in the room. Thank you.
Thank you, Sammy, and thank you, panelists. You're welcome to stay there, or you can go back to your seats, whatever you're more comfortable with. We're almost at the end of the morning session. It's been a lot of information I think we've all taken from it. It's Mike's job as chair of the GSMA EMF and Health Group to give you a summary of everything you heard this morning, so you don't have to write your own. Mike will tell you what you might have taken from the day. Following that, we will break for lunch, and then we will resume at 2 p.m. for the in-person measurement session. So Mike, please.
I also have new glasses, so it depends on which way I'm going to look. Well, firstly, without putting my glasses on, I think we all had a copy of the brochure that was on our desks when we came in. And we all, on behalf of the GSMA, as chair of the global group, I wanted to thank you for making the time available to come to a session like this, because as Jack said at the very start, it's one of those sessions where We can hear about the science, we can hear about the policy, and I'll talk about those in a minute. We can have some great panel discussions where there's a lot of different material that gets presented. But at the end of the day, you know, we each take different things out of this from our own perspectives. It's great this year that we're combining with the standards organisation, the IEC, and we're having a workshop this afternoon to look at the actual measurement methods. Some of the measurement methods are easy, some are a little bit more complex, and we'll see about that. But if I start with, you know, what the GSMA has published in terms of its material, I think there's now 35 countries and over 61 surveys across 31 countries. Now, we talked about a little bit about the measurements, but that gives us some indication of what the background EMF exposure levels are like. I know last year or a couple of years ago, we looked at how can we make this information more widely available, and we started this project. We only had a handful of countries, and we wanted countries to contribute. The standards were being developed. We heard at the panel session just before about how the standards have evolved, and they are now really making a difference with worked case studies and technical reports. So that is enabling communities and regulators and operators to choose the method that best suits them or best suits the application they need. One thing that struck me, and we'll talk about the science in a minute, but just on the levels, when we heard from Theo in the SEAWave project, the actual efficiency of 5G is being demonstrated to be far more efficient, and the background EMF levels are considerably lower. My experience in Australia is exactly that. We were the third country to roll out 5G. Now, at the same time, a year later, COVID struck. Everyone moved from working in the office to working at home. Now, a lot of the communities, they said, actually, you know, they all went mobile. Telemedicine grew, you know, thrived, but people's connectivity remained. And that's because we had increased the capacity with the addition of 5G. We had also improved 4G. We were doing more measurements at the time, and we were showing that the background levels were in fact stable. It was very interesting with the comment before from Poland that I think it was an activist or a mobile facility had been burnt down, and they were quite surprised that the internet had got slower. But there wasn't this connection between what is the mobile service actually providing. So I think there's a real role there for, you know, every community and every country is different, and there are different stages of maturity and different stages of information. But there is a wealth of information. It's just about matching what is needed in that jurisdiction and that region. And we've seen with everything, I'm certainly not going to summarize every presentation, but there's information here that is useful for many, many different communities. If I look at the start, when we heard about the science, I was very encouraged to see the results of the Cosmos study from Dr. Feychting earlier. What we're looking at there is a study with over 30 years latency in terms of a length of time, in terms of mobile phone use and cancer. But the results in terms of following a cohort over time and looking at was there any incidence or was there any change, are obviously showing that we have a lot of confidence in the technology, and we're not seeing that, which was different to when interphone was used as one of the primary objectives or primary studies in the original IARC classification. So I think the work of Cosmos is really matching some of the other studies that we're now seeing from a science-based perspective, giving communities trust in the technology. So it was an excellent presentation, and thank you very much for sharing that really important data. We heard about SEAWave. Now, primarily that's a European study, but it's very interesting in other countries to look at what is the deliverable of SEAWave and what is it going to mean. And I was touched by the fact that all of the research data to date and going out and doing the monitoring stations. I think the monitoring stations are excellent. They're serving a purpose and they're providing great background information. For policymakers, they can take that away and then they can say, hey, there are studies going on. And what we're seeing, as I mentioned before, is in fact that the 5G levels are lower than what we've had for other technologies, and they're more efficient. Obviously, we've got the various methods for assessment as well. Interestingly enough, a number of countries have rolled out commercial millimetre wave mobile systems for 5G, and I think it'll form a huge basis for the capacity needed for the growth of mobiles in the future. And I'll be very interested in the SEAWave analysis in terms of the risk assessment. What we have found in a lot of surveys in Australia, and I think that was commented on here before, is the actual exposure levels, the realistic levels on millimetre wave are very, very, very low, because it's delivering the information so quickly that the actual level is very, very low. If you looked at peak levels, they don't represent what is realistic in the community, and that's what standards are now providing those opportunities for. So from a SEAWave perspective, certainly be watching this space to see what the risk assessment is, and it would be great. And I think you talked about different levels of exposure. One thing that I would really encourage when looking at that and preparing the results is, how does it compare to actual levels in communities from millimetre wave? Because it's very different to previous technologies. The world has not stopped using mobile phones. The devices are growing exponentially, and the amount of data is increasing for a variety of uses, but the overall background levels, as we've seen, have remained relatively stable. An excellent update from the World Health Organization on the environmental health criteria. Now, I know Emilie said this has been a long time project and it's varied over time, but the systematic reviews, which are the fundamental science that underpin each element of research, are so fundamental. The original, method statement is so fundamental as well, that was published first, so we knew exactly what the process was going to follow and what the protocol was. Then the systematic reviews through the independents. They do the review, and the quality of the science was another key thing that stood out, and making sure that the reviews are published based on quality, or the quality ranking comes into it. And of course, when the environmental health criteria then comes to be published, I think we're looking at next year. We always say next year, but I think it really is next year. That will be such an important framework for us to say, looking at the whole body of science over decades with the systematic reviews, this is what the WHO has found in terms of a risk assessment, the recommendations going forward, and this is the overall advice on health. I think that's going to be very, very important for policymakers. And we've just seen with the most recent mobile phones and cancer study from the, I think, Systematic Review 1, a very, very reassuring study from the WHO that showed that no matter the length of time, the amount of calls, there was no association between the use of mobile phones, the length of time, and the number of calls with an increased risk or increased association with brain tumours. Now that received a lot of media attention in Australia and a lot of other countries around the world, and that's a fundamental question that the community and the public are asking. And I think I really welcome that result, and I look forward to how the EHC comes together. So it was great to see the science aspect. That's one of the values of this session, to be able to ask the panelists the question and to be able to interact like the audience did. I think that's a fundamental value in hosting a workshop like this. It doesn't always happen at conferences, but we've basically got, I think, a 5-day conference into half a day where we can ask a lot of those important questions that we can take back. We then had, so I've gone past the WHO, we then moved on to a panel session. And at the start of the panel session, I was thinking, how am I going to summarise such a variety of different opinions? There's a couple of key things that came to light, and they've come out in other events like this before. Public trust has to be number one, because we've all got different experiences, we've all got different professional, we all work in different areas, But I think there's I asked a question about how do you ensure public trust, and how can the public ask the right questions, or how do they get answers that suit them? And it comes down to a couple of factors, which is having independence of research, having independence of assessments, and programs run by trusted authorities like governments. And Jack made the assessment before, when COVID struck, we all had the issues that we had to deal with. It was the governments and health agencies that helped put to bed some of the misinformation and the mistrust, because they were working effectively to do that. What we see is a number of different countries have different issues to deal with. And I think the response depends on the issues in those countries. So do you do a public campaign, or do you answer reactively? That will vary on the country, but having the data and having the information available, and we heard about a couple of, I think most governments have excellent websites and resources. Not everyone is concerned about this, but people that are, they've got access to the information. So public trust came out as number one when I was looking at all of the discussions. Global standardization. Now, having different, if every country did something differently, we're going to see different results. The advantage of having global standards from the International Electrotechnical Commission, adopted by the ITU as well, and we do a lot of our standards in collaboration with the IEEE. So having a global standards approach with experts that know how to do the assessments and produce these technical papers and reports, as we'll see after lunch, that's fundamental, so that we all know there's a common baseline and they are researched methods. There are easy ways to do 5G measurements, and there are more complex ways to do 5G measurements depending on what people are asking for. And a lot of it comes back to what is the problem you are trying to solve. So what's the fundamental question? If I look at, we heard about the German approach, we've heard about the issue in Poland I mentioned earlier. And I think in terms of, to wrap it up, countries are doing, I know that governments are doing their own measurement programs, and a lot of those are very well received. But you won't, and somebody mentioned this earlier in one of the science debates, I think you're not going to solve everybody's individual concern. But what we have to recognise is that the technology has a lot of benefits, and people are using the technology and it's globally accepted. We need to promote, we need to make the information available that is relevant to what people are asking. We need to have trusted programs. We need to work together in a collaborative approach, and the different panelists you saw before have all been, their organisations have all been contributing to that global body of knowledge. It's events like this that enable you to come and ask the panelists questions. And look, I hope that's been a useful summary. I think I've learnt far more this year. I'm very reassured on the quality of the science. I'm very reassured on what we're seeing. I know there are different ways to measure 5G, and what we are seeing through the measurements that the GSMA have published is that the overall exposure levels remain very low, and the uptake of 5G is certainly, it's certainly accelerating, and it's far more efficient. I look forward to the following years when the technologies grow and how the measurement methods evolve. But I think we're well overdue for that coffee break, that lunch break, and the value of this, which is you all working together. But I'd like to thank you all for coming, all the presenters, all of the speakers, on behalf of the GSMA, and give yourselves a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, for that summary. Just a couple of other groups to thank as well. Thank also the online participants. It may have been very unsocial where you are in the world as you joined us today, so we do really appreciate your time. I also wanted to thank the steering committee. We started planning this event in February this year, and I hope you feel like it's been a useful day. Please do talk to any of the GSMA staff here to provide your feedback, what worked, what didn't work throughout the day. We always welcome that. And I also want to thank my GSMA colleagues who've been helping put this event together today and have come in at last minute to help in various points. So thank you, everyone.